Hey everybody, Dr. James Lyons-Weiler here. We're just doing the little intro bugs and things like that here. Let's make it all official.
This is a production of the WWDNYK studios. No children or animals were harmed in the production of this podcast.
All right, hey, welcome to the WWDNYK studios. Dr. James Lyons-Weiler at your service here. And I'm very happy to say that this is our second video podcast. You can look at unbreakingscience.com for the 3 inaugural bootcamp episodes on how to evaluate and interpret and understand scientific studies. And given the name Unbreaking Science, obviously what I want to do is improve the nature of the science that we do and how it impacts public health. Because if you have sound science behind your public health policies, then you're not going to be accidentally hurting millions of people. So today I'm going to share with you an interview and some time with Joshua Bennet. Say hi, Joshua.
Hello.
Hey.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, you're welcome.
Am I talking loud enough?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Totally good. So, and of course the web controller here, this is, like I said, very informal. We're low budget production. I'm going to cut back and forth between the two of us. So, Joshua, right, my man. So I like you. I like you because you are on point. I like you because you're a clear communicator. You, where does that come from? Does that come from life experience that you see, you kind of cut right to the chase?
Most of that's learned. I tend to be quiet. I tend to be introverted. I have a career choice that is not typically for that sort of person. So I've had to acclimate a little bit and develop some sort of a public persona. I'm not a great public speaker, but I can pretend to be one here and there. I do a lot better writing than talking.
Okay, well, I don't know. I've had some conversations with you. You're pretty clear communicator. So looking at the situation that we're in right now, right? We were talking a little bit earlier about how with the Institute for Pure and Applied Knowledge, IPAC, and your own profession and what you're involved in, that seems to be a perfect fit from, go ahead and explain what you're talking about there.
So, as far as I understand it, and I don't know exactly what you do, just like you don't know exactly what I do. You have an idea,
That's
but
right.
You don't know some of the smaller details. But I feel like you and I kind of hold down the fort at opposite ends of the spectrum. You're the scientist. You're the one figuring the stuff out in the lab. You're the one that is figuring out that maybe it takes a long time for our bodies to get rid of this aluminum and all this, and you're doing that. I'm on the complete other side of the spectrum. I'm supposed to be operating
In front.
I take care of the people. I have final clinical and operational and regulatory responsibility for the people in my facility. It's interesting in long-term care. There is a strong emphasis on resident rights and patient rights that the rest of healthcare is losing on, and they're still protected for us, and we don't have. I've not worked in facilities where you have like mandated vaccines, for example. I have some for it's mandated for the employees, but for the patients,
Yeah.
we're just not there.
So when we go from the continuum translational research, right? So in full disclosure, I don't have a lab, right? If I needed any data from any patients to access a clinical population, I would have to find a collaborator. To access their tissues and so on, we would have to subcontract and contract it out. But there are service labs
Right.
that would do PCR and things like that. When we come to that, and we're going to come to that with Paul Thomas and so on. But you are a healthcare administrator in a nursing home situation, isn't it, right? And that includes people that tend to be elderly, they tend to be frail, medically frail, and so on. And so going from basic translational and clinical research, where, okay, this is what it looks like in theory, or this is what the data looks like in a study, and then in translation into the practice, yeah, it's good to have someone at IPAC who is affiliated with IPAC in the clinic. You're in a clinic, basically. You're in the field, if you will. And so no, I appreciate that. It's a continuum, not a difference. It's because when I was at university, obviously, all the hospitals there, but I was in the Department of Pathology at the University of Pittsburgh. Anyway, your personal situation. How did you become vaccine risk aware? How did you become aware that there may be discrepancies between the actual clinical rollout with vaccination programs and what the science might say?
Well, unfortunately, like a lot of people, I learned the hard way. And now as I continue to read and learn, I see that my entire life truly is marked by vaccine injury. Not in a life-threatening way, and until recently, and not in a dramatic way like some other people have had to deal with. My mom had to get an MMR in 2004 for a job. I would have been 16. So she did. She developed problems in about 1 to 2 weeks after that. She was eventually diagnosed with fibromyalgia and Hashimoto's. And she went from, she had a reputation for being, she was an ICU nurse. She's a nurse anesthetist now. She was an ICU nurse at the time, I think that's what she was doing. And she got really sick. And all of a sudden, she went from very ambitious, driven, on it, involved, to go and work, come home. Go and work, come home. It's all she could do. And she figured out what was wrong with her in like 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Because she just didn't know. She had been to many doctors, she'd been to many specialists, and typically when you go to the specialist, they troubleshoot within their silos. There are some people who are good at being aware about what's going on in other disciplines, but I don't know that she ran into those people.
Yeah, the degree of specialization in medicine is kind of ridiculous. There's hardly enough generalists that also are specialists. There are some that can, but to every hammer, every problem seems like a nail, right?
Right.
If you're a hammer, every problem seems like a nail. The world is filled with nails. So, is she doing better?
She is. We are both. We both will have lifelong detoxification regimens that we really cannot deviate from. I also know that there are, among people that watch this, there are several different ways to detoxify certain problems, certain issues from your body. What's the word I'm looking for? The adjuvants, the metals, all the crap you get in you.
Yeah, sure.
So there's several different ways. My mom and I choose a fully vegan, plant-based route, and it's worked for her. It's worked for me.
Organic, of course, right?
To every bit that you can,
yeah,
as much as you can.
Yeah, once I tried juicing once, and I tried the for a while. Grace and I tried juicing, and I tried some non-organic kale or something like that, and I soaked it 3 times. And I washed it 3 times in a big bowl on the gray stuff that was coming off, and I thought I cleaned it. I did it, and I juiced all that. And I ended up with the worst migraine I ever had. It's got to be careful.
Yeah, you can, and that might have just been from the kale anyway. Sometimes if you're not into that and you don't typically do it and you make a change like that, it can.
Yeah, I've been doing organic for a while, but
Oh,
trying to
okay.
save some bucks, right? So I was doing organic because Grace and I were together, and then she took off for a while to go take care of her parents, and then I tried to cheat. I'm gonna juice on the cheap, and I regret
Didn't work
it.
out.
Hmm. Yeah. So, healthcare administrator in a healthcare situation where you got elderly people, and your job is to do exactly what?
So I'm a licensed nursing home administrator, so I'm responsible for all financial, clinical, operational, regulatory. Um, I'm in charge of everything at the building. I'm the
Mhm.
person who everything falls to me.
Yeah.
Everyone reports to me or reports to someone that reports to me, and that does not mean I'm the most important person in the building. That
Right.
just means that's the role I have, and if something goes well, this is how you run a team. If something goes well, you say, "Good job, team."
Right.
When something is not right,
It falls to you.
it's me.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you don't have certain conversations that you need to.
So if accidentally the month's supply of vaccines happen to not show up, that
We already got ours. As much as I'd love to fool around with something like that, it would
no,
be
I'm
wise.
just kidding. I'm just
But-
kidding. See, we
ours
gotta
will be-
have fun. So anyway, in your situation where you know that there are some people who can suffer more serious lifelong adverse events, you're obviously vaccine risk aware. You're obviously also you have a certain acumen, is the way I describe you, that you are able to look at studies, even though it's not your domain, all right, and you're very quick
Sure, correct.
study in logic and reason on how do you draw this inference. If I set up a randomized clinical trial, what kind of inference can you expect from that? If I do a correlational study or retrospective study, what kind of inference can I expect from that? And that's actually called levels of evidence in medical research. So, of course, the mainstream story is that there are, I don't know, anywhere between dozens of studies to some people erroneously claim thousands of studies that show that vaccines don't cause autism.
Right.
And starting right there from the word cause, all of that is based on studies that are never designed to test causality in the first place.
Right now, and I didn't.
Hang on, let me switch.
Sure.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I did not know that when I wrote the thing for science and public policy. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
I just read the study and I thought something's not right, because I had seen it floating around. People were posting it saying, "See, look, they're at it again. These people are saying all this stupid stuff." And I was in a discussion with somebody because I just started reading about vaccines like in March of this year. This is very new to me. I knew, I had my mother's injury, and then in 2015, by that time we kind of knew what happened to my mom, and I took a flu shot anyway because my employer said I had to. So I now have central nervous system demyelination. That my symptoms started about 4 days after that flu shot in 2015.
Oh no!
So
I didn't know that. That's really upsetting to learn.
yeah.
Sorry to hear that.
Um,
So when you what he's talking about here, folks, I'm bringing it up on the screen, is a paper that he published. It's peer reviewed, and its shortcomings in the latest MMR vaccination and autism study, a healthcare administrator's response, by Joshua Bennet. This is the journal Science, Public Health Policy and the Law, where I'm the editor-in-chief. It's the first volume, and we'll get into the guts of that, but if we could go back to the question of determining causality, right? So if the studies those scores of studies that are out there that were done, that were evaluated by the Institutes of Medicine, that the CDC cites, that the AAP sent to the President of the United States saying vaccines don't cause autism, then if they're based on a type of study that can't test causality, that's one thing, right? And then also, if they're not designed properly or if they're underpowered, is what statistical power means?
Yeah.
Okay, so statistical power, you might know, for people who don't know, it means that you have a large enough sample size so that you can, if you do a study and you don't see any difference or you don't see a significant effect, you don't have what's called a positive result. Say you're testing for the improvement in health outcome under a drug A versus drug B. If drug A is equal to drug B in its efficacy there, then you do not reject the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis being that there's no difference. Now, we never accept the null hypothesis in science. Under null hypothesis testing, you never ever accept the null hypothesis. You simply fail to reject the null hypothesis because there could be something that you did wrong with your study, and it's just one study. Now, if you have 20 studies that are conducted and all of them are underpowered, where you didn't have enough power in your study to be able to detect a difference that's really there, you could do 20 studies all day long, and the odds are that you're going to not find a significant difference. It's a trivial result. It's a non-interesting result.
You've done nothing.
That's a good way to say that. So it's as if no study has occurred, and if it's underpowered. And so I'm not going to take up too much time on it, but obviously I went in and I evaluated all the studies that were sent to POTUS, and I came up with an objective scoring scheme. And that's a manuscript that has now the journals, what I have come to call the corporate journals, simply don't reply when I submit it.
Yeah.
They used to reply with no, this isn't appropriate for our journal or anything. So now we're going to cut to your paper. So when you came to evaluate what Brian Hooker had to say about this, and tell us how you felt on that when you took this task on. I'll cut to you. Okay.
So I was in a discussion with a buddy of mine from back home in Arkansas, and it wasn't really with him. He had made a post, and I had not yet walked down the autism road at all. I didn't have a reason to yet. Somebody asked me about it, and I said, I don't know, I don't have autism, which we'll get to that later.
Okay.
But these people, this girl said, not very politely, vaccines don't cause autism. This is clear. Everybody knows this. And she posted the Havid. How do you say his name?
Havid, yeah.
From Stockholm, Sweden, Denmark. Stockholm's in Denmark. He is an epidemiologist. He works for I think a vaccine manufacturer called Staten Serum Institute. He's been there for a while. He's the only one that answered my emails, by the way. So at least he answered my emails and was reasonably helpful. Nobody else. Guy Esslick wouldn't talk to me. But I had to get to him for something else. But anyway, I read this guy's his paper that was published in Annals of Internal Medicine, and I could not help. This was the first one I really dug my teeth into, and I just the disclaimers were horrifying. I thought I was like, maybe I'm not understanding what this means, because it says they looked at like over 500,000 kids. You read the NPR article about it, and the NPR article is very well written. It's just not correct. But it's well put together, and then you go in the actual study, and it's like over 500,000 kids, and how many medical records did they look at? I'm sure
I don't
you
remember
know
the details. Yeah,
it's zero, and I'm like, how are you going to come? That didn't
Oh
make
no,
sense
right,
to me.
right, yeah. They
So no medical records are reviewed. Then I read and see it's basically, it is a retrospective study. It's 11 years of data from like the health ministry. From 1999 to 2010. But they didn't look at anybody's medical records. They just compared a bunch of kids that had vaccines.
Tell everybody why that's important. Why they perhaps should have looked at the medical records on file.
Say that again.
Tell everybody why they should have. So the study was a retrospective, right here. The study was a very large epidemiological study.
Right.
A retrospective study where they looked back over time, right, to assess the rates of autism, to determine whether there was sufficient evidence at the population level that vaccines do or do not ostensibly cause autism with a method that can't test for causality. But there's a lot of granularity to our criticisms. But go ahead, tell us why it's important that they actually look at medical records rather than just look at rates.
Well, you have to. You have to know the population that you're dealing with. I mean, are they autistic? Are they not? Do they have other issues? Do they have other clinical contraindications for vaccines? None of that's made clear. I think the autism rate in Denmark at the time of the study is about 1.65%, and I know Brian Hooker said that, hey, or maybe it was you. I don't remember who said it.
We both said it,
but somebody
independently.
Said the rates,
yeah, let me bring that up. That's a good thing. I'll bring up Brian's. I'll bring up my thing first. We'll cut to my blog. The smoking gun is the study-wide autism rates of 0.9 to 1%.
Yeah, exactly.
The rate of ASD in Denmark is 1.65%. Where are the missing cases of ASD?
I mean, that's almost half of those kids.
Right. And what this means scientifically, and why this is so important, is these studies are conducted in a way where they will use exclusionary criteria. Right? They'll say, okay, we have kids with autism, but we're not going to count the kids that have autism and this, or we're not going to have the kids that have autism and family risk, or they're not going to have the kids that have. They'll find out these things.
Or if you have an invalid Georgia birth certificate,
right?
those get really wild. Those reasons they exclude people.
Right, and that invalid birth certificate thing, they have a rationale, but it was post hoc. They made it up.
Yep.
They didn't. That wasn't the data analysis plan that was actually approved. If there was a data analysis plan approved by an IRB, that would be an interesting thing to find out. It'd be nice to know if the CDC actually follows the rules of basic rules of doing human subjects research. But if you have a study that's retrospective correlational, and then you say we're going to exclude this and that population, like I know that there are some of the studies excluded kids that had seizures, as if autism kids don't have seizures. Right. That there's some fundamental difference in the etiology of autism for kids that have seizures. Now this one right here is my blog article, and Brian published a very nice critique as well, which I'll cut over to that. Scientists' rebuttal to the Danish study, and see if I can zoom in on that at all. But anyway, scrolling down on it, he lists the problems, and one of the problems that he also noted was, and I noticed in your paper, I'm not going to criticize you for it, I edited it in your paper, you said I was echoing Hooker, and if I cared, and if my ego was involved in this, I would be like, yeah, whatever, Josh, nice to know you. Thanks a lot, buddy, but no, that's not what it's all about. In fact, Brian is a gentlemanly scholar. He's a gentlemanly scholar, and one of the things that he brought up in his critiques that he brought up was that they didn't correct for genetic risk of autism, and you should adjust for somebody that has a genetic risk of autism, and I asked him to do a Facebook Live kind of debate over that, a gentlemanly debate. And what he said to me was, at the end of the debate, where I pointed out, those are the people that are probably at risk of genetic risk of vaccine injury, right? Encephalopathy from vaccines leading to autism, and that they should be included in this study. And he said, when you're right, you're right. He said, I'm not much of a debater. When you're right, you're right. I love Brian. He's so real. He's not like, an ego hound on things. So he does a great karaoke. So,
good.
Yeah, if you can catch him.
Bring him to the next IPAC thing.
Yeah, that IPAC gala was fun. So, anyway, so you said when you fell down this question, somebody contacted you, or you were in contact with somebody, and they said vaccines don't cause autism, right? And so you're looking at this and you're going, okay, let me look at this new study.
When she was railing me too, she said, look, you don't understand. I know science. I'm about to finish nursing school. Yeah, and I'm in my head. I'm like, okay, because
you're like, maybe she's right. Maybe she's right. Let me take a look at it, right?
Well, no, because although I don't have like a formal background in science, I went to Bible college, which people will think, well, that's the opposite of science. Not really. We learned a lot of philosophy. We learned a lot of epistemology. We learned a lot about thinking.
Yeah, very cool.
So she is I mean, and this is what happens. This is what happens in the media. This is what happens from doctors and healthcare professionals. They live in the logical fallacy called appeal to authority.
That's right.
They live there.
Well, when I said maybe she's right, it's just like she's a human being. She made a claim.
Yeah, she
You know, she's got a scientific background, a little bit of a medical background. Not all medical, not everybody in the medical field is a scientist, but you know, maybe she's right. So, well, I'm asking you, what motivated you to do a deep dive into what was going on with the study?
Well, I had seen it before. People were floating it around saying, "Hey, read this."
Yeah.
But then somebody said, "This is the reason that you're wrong." So I was like, "Well, I've been challenged. I kind of have to." So I did.
Yeah.
And I messaged her and I said, "I'm going to put together a response for you." This was in a comment section. So then I sent a private message and said, "Hey, I read this study.
Yeah.
It is very interesting." And I was going to poke around a little bit. I don't know if I don't think I knew about you yet. I was just figuring out my way around.
Right.
But I said, you know, I'm going to put something together because I just had questions about Novo Nordisk funding. That was enough for me to say, this seems awfully funny. This is like going to Halliburton University and learning that oil and coal are good for the environment.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. So yeah, you found these corporate connections. Your paper mentions corporate connections. And then Nordisk is a massive multinational vaccine manufacturer, pharmaceutical company in Denmark with market capitalization that is greater than $49 billion.
And if they're paying 20%, an effective tax rate of around 20% to the government,
yeah,
the government has $10 billion in the matter.
Do you see what I mean?
As to whether or not vaccines cause autism. I mean, this is ridiculous.
Do you see what I mean when I say that Josh here has some acumen? It's like he sees things. He sees things in the connection and goes and gets the specifics on it. The government of Denmark getting $20 billion from this vaccine company it would be 10 billion.
10, it'd be about 10.
10 billion per year. That's
I mean, if vaccines
quite
cause
a
autism,
conflict of interest
they're
on
gonna lose money.
regulation. Oh yeah. Well, let's talk about that too. If vaccines cause autism, this is a fundamental premise, and why this all started with Wakefield. The reason why they went after Wakefield is because they feared that people would stop vaccinating their children if they figured out that vaccines might cause autism, and so they Wakefielded Wakefield. That's the reason why they Wakefielded Wakefield, right? And that's a premise. Vaccine rates did drop, and people stopped using the MMR in England, but that's just one vaccine. So this generalization that, wow, vaccines might cause autism because there was an alleged link, when what Andy was talking about at the time was we need to do more science, we need to do more studies.
He didn't even say. His paper that everybody hates, nobody's ever read it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it remind me of the claim, but he didn't even say. He just said more study needs to happen.
What his study actually, he and his colleagues, what they concluded was that there seems to be a unique gastrointestinal disorder that is unique to kids with autism, and that there may be some unknown role from the vaccine. Does that sound like a claim that vaccines might cause autism? In the paper, no. It doesn't sound anything like that. He never, ever, and his colleagues never, ever, in their postulated that vaccines might cause autism. Now what do we see in 2019, Joshua? We see study after study after study that says, hey, look, there's something wrong with the microbiome of the gut of these kids with autism. Hey, look, if we actually do a fecal microbiota transfer, there's a 50% reduction in their symptoms. And, you know, Wakefield science that was thwarted and aborted way back when over the fear that everyone's going to stop vaccinating their kids because one vaccine might cause autism, even though he didn't say that. I think it appeared when he was pressed in a press conference, he did say something that was more along that there might be some concern for vaccines causing autism. I have to go back and look, but in reality, it's a premise that the entire world is going to stop all vaccines just if we find that vaccines cause encephalopathy, which causes autism, which is what the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program concluded.
Right.
You know, some 38 times. No, 83 times. Sorry, I transposed those numbers. And another dozen or so cases now where they've given awards with kids that happen to have autism if you argue encephalopathy, but if you argue autism, you're dead.
Did you know that was on Fox News in 2011? That 83 cases in the vaccine court.
Yeah.
I could not believe that.
Yeah, Mary Holland did a great interview.
Yeah,
she's
that-
on the
that's who
IPAC
that was
advisory
with,
board,
yeah.
and she's also just been made general counsel, I think, of the Children's Health Defense. And she and colleagues, the Louis Conti is a co-author. There are other people co-authors on that paper, and it's a fantastic truth. It's a moment of it's a watershed publication. I think that, if vaccines can cause encephalopathy, that can lead then, as the court argued, as sequela, autism. The court got away with saying, okay, we're not saying vaccines cause autism because any finding by, is not even a court really, by the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program does not lead to any inference of causality, right? VAERS doesn't lead to causality. Correlation studies don't lead to causality. Let's test the right fucking hypothesis here, right?
Right.
Let's get down to business and actually test the right fucking hypothesis. It's so infuriating that, if they're not going to test the right hypothesis and then make these overarching claims that vaccines don't cause autism, in the meantime, parents are bringing their kids in vaccine after vaccine after vaccine. What should have happened, in my view, is that science and medicine should have been much more responsible with the findings of Wakefield and his colleagues. Whether you see this, whether anybody sees this as a defense of Wakefield or not is irrelevant. Yes, I will defend him to my death. He's a good man. He's a very good man. He's a hero in terms of sounding the alarm and then taking the crap that came his way because medicine and science couldn't tolerate that reality. They didn't know what to do. What they should have done is they should have said, okay, let's embark on a series of studies that show the mechanisms of pathophysiology about how vaccines might cause autism. Let's see if we can reproduce that in animals. If we can reproduce it in animals, then change those types, change the vaccines, change the components of vaccines. What did they do instead? Blah, 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 blah. Vaccines don't cause autism, and Andrew Wakefield is a fraud.
When that's going to get really awkward. Because
it doesn't matter. Listen, doesn't look at glyphosate. The entire crop system of the United States of America now, if we determine that glyphosate is a carcinogen at the EPA level,
right?
How are we going to feed the world? How are we going to feed the people? We need a transition period. And so what they should have said is, listen, we want to be sure that we're going to work first to find the pre-indicators of risk. Not everybody gets autism from a vaccine, obviously, right? I mean, that's some of the counter arguments that have been thrown my way. Well, if vaccines caused autism, then everybody that got any vaccine would get autism.
Well, don't you know
that's
that
their
every
illogic.
Single person that gets in a car wreck always breaks their leg? Because I broke my leg in a car. I didn't really. I just thought. I did break my leg on a skateboard once. So every person that.
Sorry to hear it. So do you still skateboard?
I've not been able to because of my flu shot injury.
I'm sorry to hear
But I grabbed one a week ago. I was rolling around with my daughter, and I did a trick, and I haven't done any tricks in a couple of years. So that was fun. Then the whole next day I did
Well, the analogy would really be everybody that drives a car gets into an accident.
Something like that.
Right? Yeah. I mean, one of those analogies, and it's a false analogy. It doesn't make any sense. It's entirely irrelevant. And so what they should have done is found pre-indicator risks and said, okay, we're going to keep these kids out of the vaccination program, and then see if that reduced the incidence of these problems of the GI. Right? If there's problems with the GI, those were the symptoms they were talking about. They should have said, how in the world could a vaccine cause a problem with the GI? Instead, they said, no, we can't imagine any plausible way that could happen. Instead of doing science, they relied on this argument that we can't imagine a plausible pathway towards by which,
What does that mean? That in itself is an appeal to authority.
Right.
It's not an appeal to science.
Right.
In science, you're making an observation. You're allowed to have a bias up front, but you make your observation, and if the data doesn't match, you have some hard thinking to do. And they just say, well, this doesn't meet what we already know.
Science itself is a screen on objectivity. So, of course, everybody that does every study has some preconceived notion, right? And you can formalize that with Bayesian analysis called prior probabilities if you want to. But the whole idea is to have some objective framework by which we set up an experiment or we set up a study or a study design, and we do the study and we look back at the data and let the data speak for themselves. Instead, it was too important that they douse this fear in the population and they would sacrifice just what they thought was going to be one career, one doctor, that was going to be done. They made a whipping boy out of him, made an example out of him, and how dare you now say that vaccines might cause autism if you're a medical professional? You can't do that.
Well, you know, when I said earlier, it's going to get awkward. You know, I think it was the 30th or 31st of May. I read an article that was published in The Guardian, which is a major news outlet, about a paper published in Cell about the autism in the mice. They were giving mice autism, and then they were reversing it. They were inducing it and reversing it.
Well, anybody that would care to know more, hang on. I don't usually. Okay, so the environmental and genetic causes of autism. This book, right, should have the red dot on it, but it doesn't. This is an original rare one. I read 2,000 studies in detail, and in here there are animal studies, and there's an interesting primate study that happened at the University of Pittsburgh, where they took higher primates and they injected them. I think it was with thimerosal. I'm not sure. In the comments, I'll post the actual study, or the preliminary study. The doctor, who was a female doctor, relocated to Texas and replicated the study and couldn't replicate it, and that went away. There wasn't any further follow-up on primates, and then all of a sudden this kind of research became disallowed under the argument that it was unethical to do this to animals. But it's ethical to have a whole vaccine program.
We're doing it to people. We're doing it to people.
Right.
We're doing it to humans. So.
Right. Exactly. So, I'm glad that we went there. This HVID study is problematic because it's one of the largest studies. Now, I want to get into some of the details about just because you have a large study, that's not necessarily a good thing. It could be actually a disaster because, like, finding autism, finding the strength of the signal of autism in the whole population study, if there's a subgroup in the population that has a genetic risk, is like finding a needle in a haystack. Mm-hmm. And it makes it more difficult, not easier, to find association. So we know that association does not test causality. We know that there's data cookery or statistical sham wizardry, which is what I call it in my book, Cures versus Profits. Aimed at reducing the signal of an association. And now we're looking at a situation where they're doing the wrong study altogether. Instead of taking patients who have autism, patients that don't have autism, but both were vaccinated, that would be a different kind of study, and then looking back that way, and then seeing if they have a higher incidence of vaccination, let's say, right? Which is difficult to do in a highly vaccinated population, but it's a more powerful design. Or better yet, doing a randomized clinical trial, where you say, we're actually going to control for the variability in the population by randomizing people who have family members that have autism, and we're going to randomize them and do 1,500 versus 1,500, and we're not going to vaccinate 1,500, and we are going to vaccinate 1,500. I think that study would show something.
And you bring up a good point. I hear a lot about how unethical, and you're not even talking about the same thing, but I hear a lot about how randomized clinical trials are unethical with vaccines altogether. And you can do all kinds of things. You could do adults who can would consent to whatever they want, because they say that if you're going to do a randomized clinical trial, you're going to have a child that you don't know the vaccination status of, so that these studies are unethical. But could you not do that with adults?
Well, my answer to that is, let's say that you required, if the FDA grew a set and decided to require randomized clinical trials for approval of vaccines, they would designate all vaccines new drugs. They would reclassify them as new drugs. They're no longer biologics. Mm-hmm. That would instantly cause them to have to be tested using randomized clinical trials. Like they did with the HPV vaccine, if it's say, varicella chickenpox vaccine, and we're testing it on, over 4 years, you're just testing whether people that only got the varicella or only got the CDC schedule, right? Either way, if you whatever study you're doing it, they can be vaccinated after the study, like they did with HPV. So it's not correct to say that the risk of getting chickenpox to this population is so high, because you're doing a clinical trial in a highly vaccinated population that doesn't have rampant varicella, right? So it's bogus.
Is that why? Here's something I never understood when I was looking through the inserts. the safety testing periods are very short for the solicited adverse reactions.
Right.
They're
So let's
very
break
short,
this
but I
down. Let's break this down. So you said solicited adverse reactions. That's another problem with these kind of studies.
Right.
When they do the randomized clinical trials, the short term, they only recognize the solicited adverse events, not any new adverse event that might happen. So they can say, well, that data didn't show anything because we never analyzed it.
Well, but they talk about solicited adverse events where they'll give you the card that has like the pre-select, fever, headache, rash.
Yeah, if you have any of these, let us know.
And then some of the studies were, and they vary by vaccine, had a slightly longer monitoring period for unsolicited severe reactions, but they still weren't very long. But Gardasil stood alone because even though now they're solicited adverse reactions, and you can check this. Anybody can look at this themselves and go to fda.gov/media/90064/download. You can go look it up, and you can see that they check these things. They did the solicited reaction test for 14 days, but they looked for unsolicited adverse events for 48 months. That's the only vaccine on the children's schedule. Did I get something wrong with it? Because I had to read it over and over.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I should have cut to you.
But
it's close. So what they did was they said we're going to open up new medical records, and anything that the people that are enrolled in the trial tell us that's not a solicited adverse event, we're going to put them into the new medical records, and they were not included in along with the rest of the adverse events. Right. So if you look at what they did by sequestering them into new medical records, yes, the data were submitted to the FDA.
Is that why? Because I never understood that. Like why for this one vaccine, they almost kept their word. Because we're told these vaccine trials are so long, and what they do is they'll have a 10-year study, and you and me can do two subjects.
Have you seen it? I should ask Mary Holland and everybody about that. Have you seen? I'm sorry, I spoke over you. What were you saying?
Well, I was just saying, they put they say it's a 10-year study, and you and I are just two saps that are in it. And really what happens is you and I get our shot at some point in the study, and then they watch us for 14 days, and if our head falls off on the 15th day, with a few rare exceptions, it doesn't make the study.
No, you're exactly right. So look at what happens if you do this kind of 5-day or 14-day follow-up on a vaccine, and then you say that you're following the population for 10 years. Well, those girls, we're talking mostly girls that we're talking about, at the age of 26, after getting it at 16 or 14, right? They say, geez, doc, all of a sudden I'm having this kind of weird paralysis, and I'm not, they're not going to think that it was a vaccine.
No.
Even though they're enrolled in a trial, they're not going to go, oh, that was a vaccine. I get it, right? And even if they do go to the doctor and they say, okay, well, I have this weird thing. I'm very tired. I can't get out of bed. I'm not feeling well. I don't want to socialize. The doctor's going to look at the published randomized clinical trial, if they're going to look at anything. And they're going to say, well, that's not reported in the RCT, so that wasn't the vaccine.
Right.
These girls, you recall, were not only given aluminum adjuvant as in the control group. They were told that it was saline. So they have no reason in the control group to suspect that saline would give them an adverse event. And yeah, they were lied to.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's in Mary Holland's book. So what reason would they say when they're 26, when their life is falling apart, that, oh, yeah, I was part of this trial, other than, oh, I got the vaccine at the end, but that wasn't part of the trial. So, people don't understand that you have an open label, non-randomized, uncontrolled clinical trial going on with vaccines in the entire population as well. The inference that's made is not vaccinate or aluminum adjuvant, right? When you go to the doctor doesn't say to you, all right, today let's talk about HPV vaccine, and you have two choices. The choice one is HPV vaccine. Choice two is aluminum hydroxide, or the AAHS, aluminum amorphous aluminum hydroxysulfate. Which one do you want? That's not the inference. No. So what we have right now is a clinical practice that's based on, that has no justification whatsoever, because the choice presented the choice that's available to people is HPV vaccine or no vaccine. So we have actually no valid scientific data at all. And the controls that were labeled saline, Mary Holland and Kim Mack Rosenberg and Eileen Uria went into a deep dive in analyzing the submitted data from FDA, and they found that the data that were actually submitted and labeled as saline turned out to be aluminum. The small number of salines. So we're dealing with a serious problem there. And this is not the end of the story by any means with HPV.
Yeah, where does that go? What's the next step on that one?
Right. So there was also this doubling, the possible doubling of aluminum, the halving of the aluminum for the safety trial. So they did these dose variation studies of HPV to see on efficacy. Then when it came to the safety trial, they cut the aluminum in half. And the records are really clear. It's reported in 3 places in the submitted documents that they cut the amount of aluminum in the adjuvant in half, and then that went forward as data that went to the FDA. Then when they went to market, they re-upped the vaccine amount again they doubled it. So
they put it back to where it was.
Yeah, they put it back to where it was, and so we're dealing with a product on the market that's never been adequately tested as formulated for safety at all. So even in all those studies that they talk about, that with the long-term follow-up that you said, the short-term and all that was done. Those studies were done with an inexact formula, with an incorrect formulated product. It's not the product that's on the market.
And according to the inserts, those studies are resulted in what looked to be a 1 in 43 risk of new autoimmune disorders in women,
Right,
girls
right.
and women.
Right.
And so you're saying, and I wasn't aware of this, you were saying that is with a product that it has less aluminum
Right.
than
So
HPV vaccines on the market?
less, half. It was with an experimental vaccine that was modified during, So Mary obviously and her team went and pushed for details on this, and the only explanation that they were given by the FDA was that it was a typo in 3 places. So there's a serious problem, right? Because literally speaking, the vaccine inserts don't apply to the vaccine that it comes with. If it's true that the formula was different under FDA rules and regulations, the insert that's shipped with the vaccine does not apply to the vaccine.
Then you are not meeting your informed consent burden. You're not meeting it 10 other ways either. That's just
Not even
one.
close.
I'm working on a piece right now that I expect to finish it this week. It's a short piece. It's for I forgot the name of the journal. I emailed it to you. It's the Pennsylvania Patient Safety Authority or something. It was
Nice.
it was a solicited. It just came my work email,
Nice.
and it was like anything about patient safety outcomes, and I was like, I know one because I had just been thinking about one problem that I see on social media beyond there's the initial step of asking questions where people that when you ask the question sometimes you get shot down, but once you get through that, one of the things that people are asking, and some of them started asking me, and I was like, I don't have an answer for you. I mean, my answer is I think they're lying.
Your
Okay.
answer is that we should do research.
Well, we should, and here's what we should resolve. We need to ask the question, why is FDA literature and CDC literature so different? When you look up vaccine risk on CDC, they tell you about 1 in a million. And interestingly, they also talk about vaccines as if they're like this,
Uniform.
kind of amorphous, it's this homogeneous medical item. And
Right.
it's not.
It's not.
Some of them are orders of magnitude more dangerous than others. Like 100 times,
Sure.
1,000 times,
Sure.
whatever.
Sure.
But CDC says 1 in a million, 1 in a million.
Mm-mm.
FDA says 1 in 43.
I reproduced the CDC's calculations for 1 in a million, and I know why they came to that conclusion, but it's based on
It's probably based on the vaccine court.
VAERS, not vaccine court.
Oh, okay.
So because it's based on VAERS, and we know that there's only 1% of vaccine
Right,
injuries
so-
ever reported, then we have a problem.
They're your 1 in 10,000 at
Right.
best.
Right. So, sorry, I caught you munching there.
Okay.
The book is that we were just referencing was HPV Vaccine on Trial, published by Skyhorse. It has some results in it also for type replacement, and I reanalyzed the CDC's data on type replacement, and Andrew Wakefield just published a new paper that actually took those results and put those in there on type replacement, where the CDC said, okay, listen, there's hundreds of types of HPV that are out there. If we were only targeting 4 at the time, and now we're targeting 9, if those hundreds, if we wipe these vaccine targeted types out of the vaccinated population, are they at higher risk of other rarer types of HPV coming in? As an evolutionary biologist and an ecologist, you've got to ask the question, why is a virus rare? Why are these viruses more rare? You could say, well, at the molecular level, they're just not as competitive for the insertion sites, right? Molecular ecology in the human genome. Or you can say perhaps because they're more deadly and they kill their host. That's right. So I looked at the data, and what they did was they said, okay, we're going to look at each HPV type that we assay for, a non-vaccine targeted type. We're going to look at it individually. All right, so what they did there is they reduced their statistical power because only a small subset of the people in the retrospective study they did got each of these other exotic forms of HPV. Right, so they didn't have enough power to tell that there was a difference. So they lumped them all together. As if you lump them all together and you say any new, is there a significant difference in terms of any new HPV coming into the population? The significance is huge. It's absolutely correct that there's HPV type replacement, and other studies had showed type replacement as well. There's a GLOW study from the University of Texas, and there is a study in France, another one in Germany, and so on. And each one of them concluded that it looks like HPV virus type replacement is driving this. And that result is a huge argument against vaccination, because if you're bringing in these rarer types of HPV that might be more pathogenic, we would expect an increase in HPV-associated cervical cancer in countries that adopted the vaccine, and that's exactly what we're seeing now.
And yes.
It's exactly what we're seeing now. So the not just here to rail against the CDC, although it's all.
Well, we will.
We absolutely will. So what else do we got here? We've got another publication from somewhere. What did you wrote a paper? A commentary somewhere.
It was. Really, it was just a reader response. It was the Canadian Medical Association ran a piece on. So they ran a piece. Let me back up. Natasha Crowcroft works for Public Health Ontario. I think her title is Chief Immunization Officer. I'm not sure. Maybe we could Google it, or so. Not sure on the internet. But an individual named Daphne Eisenberg, I don't know who she writes for, but an article called Measles, Who is at Risk and What Can We Do, or something like that, was run in healthydebate.ca. And it was encouraging everybody to get the measles vaccine because it's very safe and effective, and the measles are, they're going to get us. And there was a really bizarre quote in the article. And it was something to the effect of, the great thing about the MMR is that the more doses you have, the less likely you are to have an adverse reaction. So you can have as many as you want. And I thought to myself, boy, that's really strange. So I emailed them and I said, is there any sort of like clinical data or research trial or something where you could demonstrate to me a positive correlation between MMR uptake, quantitatively, like, this person had 2, or this group had 2, and their percentage of adverse reactions was so many, and then this one had 5, and then theirs was less. And nobody responded. So some other people may or may not have also emailed the same question. Mm-hmm. I don't know. My attorney said not to answer any questions. But eventually, I got a response. And I was given, I was sent to WHO guidance. The question was kind of not answered. And then it stopped. And then CMAJ ran this piece from her and another individual talking about how we have to have, if we're going to get measles vaccination rates where we want them, we're going to have this top to bottom restructuring of all this and that. And that's what I responded to.
Yeah.
And I said, they're correct. We are going to have all this and that. But the problem is that public health agencies contribute to vaccine hesitancy in ways that they do not understand.
Absolutely.
I mean, you people think I am convincing people not to vaccinate. I wish I had the influence and effect that some of these pediatricians and some of these public, the things that they say are wild. I haven't returned to this much since I wrote it. They amended their article on healthydebate.ca, and it now says it is extremely safe to receive a second or third dose of the MMR vaccine. In fact, the frequency of adverse events such as fever and rash falls with increasing number of doses of live vaccines because once antibodies have been developed, they prevent replication of the attenuated vaccine virus, whether this is MMR or some other vaccine. Stop the bus. No anti-vaxxer or whatever, whether you think that's a pejorative term or not. I kind of like it. I kind of wear it with pride. Whatever.
Well, I mean, let's talk about that.
It's meant to be a pejorative.
It's a little side thing. When it's used, it's meant to be a pejorative,
Right.
right? It's meant to dismiss valid concerns, and it's meant to shut people down so that they don't talk about valid concerns. And if you are not, say, I don't know, pick something. If you're pick a nasty label that you don't even belong to that class.
Yeah.
That pick any label that you don't belong to that class, right? Okay, let's do this. In Latin America, there are many different nationalities. What if you call them all Mexicans? That's what it's like.
Yeah.
Right? You don't call a Guatemalan a Mexican. They're offended.
Or
Not because you called them a Mexican that there's something wrong with Mexicans. Not because there's something wrong with Mexicans, just because you're not respecting them enough to understand their own nationality and to understand where they're coming from.
What?
Right? So
Yes.
that's the analogy. I have most of my, not most, but many of my friends are hardcore anti-vaxxers, and that's their choice. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's 100%. They're 100% their choice. And my choice is to say, well, take out the unsafe epitopes, take out the nasty chemicals that we know shouldn't be there because they give a biased immune response. They give a Th2 based immune response instead of a balanced immune response. And let's see if we can do better. That's. I want to do science. I don't want to shut down vaccination programs or anything like that. So, kudos to you. If you're 100% anti-vax, go for it. If I'm, great. Go ahead.
I do mean in the context of a pretty libertarian society too. So,
Yeah.
for example, just like I think recreational marijuana and recreational Claritin should be legal, which that actually already is. You could
I don't know how to use.
you
Wait.
could do
Can you
Claritin.
use Claritin recreationally? I don't know about.
I mean, you could if you wanted to. I
Oh,
think
okay.
recreational vaccination for adults should be perfectly legal. If you want to get, Natasha Crowcroft said,
Yeah,
you
let's
could.
do this. Let's do let's
You wanna
vaccinate
get
for
as many
fun.
as you can,
Sure.
Go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not below age 18 or 21.
Well, if they're going to allow vaccination in school without parental consent, then hey, we're going to have a problem, right? We're going to have a problem with kids behind the school vaccinating all day long just for fun.
Crowcroft or whomever at Public Health Ontario answered a different question. I said, please tell me where the data is that shows a decrease of adverse events with an increase of MMR uptake. Then they said fever and rash. But listen, I don't care about a fever and rash.
Right.
If I thought fever and rash were the only thing that would happen to you, I would vaccinate my kids.
Right.
I would recommend vaccination.
That's the only thing they can possibly have. Maybe
So-
maybe a little soreness in the site of injection, fever, rash, soreness in the site of injection, and then you download the vaccine insert, and you've got this huge list of things that are observed after the vaccine.
When they know.
Right. It's observed after the vaccine, but the causality is not allowed. But the vaccine insert actually says, and we talked about this with Doug and Rashan Golden last week, right? The vaccine insert says no inference of causality can be made because studies have not shown that they have been caused by this vaccine. But studies also have not been conducted to show that they're not caused.
They don't tell you that second part.
Right, and Doug and Rashan are thinking of taking this up as their issue for Haley and shooting, chasing down something in the form of like a Haley's Law or Haley's new rule from the FDA, to force vaccine manufacturers to put both that the studies do not show that they can cause these adverse events, but there are not enough studies have not also been conducted that show that they do not. So telling both sides of the story is full disclosure, and then you make your informed consent.
Well, and then people can understand, and maybe from there would be some pressure on FDA to force them to perform the proper studies, force them to perform studies designed to answer questions of causation.
Exactly.
Which would be kind of like a what study?
Okay, so the proper study for causality of any serious adverse event is a long-term randomized clinical trial. It's a gold standard, double-blinded, placebo-controlled, true placebo. And we solved the problem of saline versus vaccine is not ethical because you're denying them these life-saving vaccines by saying, well, then vaccinate the kids after the study. So that's a dead issue now. So far as I can tell, it's a dead issue. It's a dead consideration. It's a dead criticism of those people saying that vaccines can't be tested with randomized clinical trials.
Well, good call.
Thank you. I said it. It's broadcast live at the WWDNYK studios. I agree with myself, so it must be true.
The laws of the Medes and the Persians cannot be undone. They eventually somebody emailed me back with some other, like a couple of studies. One of them had a paywall. I didn't mess with it. Another one, I was able to get a different way. And in the abstract of the thing that Public Health Ontario sent to me, and remember, you can...
Wait. There was a paywall. You're affiliated with IPAC.
Oh, what?
Folks, listen. Apparently, the IPAC Research Associates don't have enough money to get studies behind a paywall. So go to ipaknowledge.org and start your monthly donation. Just $5 would allow Joshua to download and interpret another study. We need that funding. Go ahead.
What he's not telling you is that while it actually was $5, which he didn't know, it was not worth paying for.
Oh, I see.
Because I got the abstract for free.
We read full studies at IPAC. People.
We do.
We read them front to end, forward and backward.
Listen to this. It says it right up front. And I said it was an abstract. I said another abstract is cited in the addendum, and it says that to assess risk for rare or serious AEs after a third dose of MMR, because that's what I was arguing with these people about.
Yeah.
Longer-term studies than 2 weeks would be required, because these were 2-week trials.
Poor babies. They have to do long science?
You don't... the point of this article, that somebody at CMA ran, I don't know why, just won the luck of the draw that day.
Yeah.
I don't know if Public Health Ontario knows that or doesn't know. I don't know what people know.
Right.
Every day that this goes on, and I continue to hear doctors and pharmacists and nurses and whatever tell me about how safe vaccines are, I'm like, listen, one day, y'all, and I'm kind of in there too. I work in healthcare.
Right.
I'm going to be in there too, and people are going to say, we're going to say we didn't know. Like,
right.
Not me.
Right.
But we're going to be saying we didn't know collectively, and nobody's going to believe us.
Right. No, it's going to be so patently obvious. So my question about MMR is, what's the deal with this third dose of MMR when the studies actually show that there's no efficacy to the third dose of MMR? That there's absolutely no net benefit to the third dose of MMR in terms of immunity to the wild type measles. Excuse me, at least. That this is a serious problem when we have public health policy that is not founded on all of the available science. And that's why science, public health policy, and the law is a wide open forum. It's an open access forum. You don't know, it's not behind a paywall. The public has paid for the effort for this journal through their donations to IPAC, that people can publish and they can say, this is what we're doing in medicine, this is what we're doing in law, this is what we're doing with public health policy, and this is what the rest of the science says, and there seems to be a mismatch. That's the whole purpose of that. Or they can say, this is what we're doing in science, this is what we're doing in law, this is what we're doing in regulatory science, whatever, and it's a good fit because the totality of the science says this. We can do that too. So everybody, please let any professional know that science, public health policy, and the law is wide open for a free and open discussion. Right on. So do that again, Joshua. I think they missed it. All right, cool. So you were going to tell us a little bit more about yourself. You said there was another story. You said you, so far as you knew, you didn't have autism. At what point in time did you get a definitive diagnosis?
I was not diagnosed till early this year. It was suggested to me in my mid-20s that I had Asperger's.
Uh-huh.
And I thought to myself, that'd be interesting. And I went to college with a buddy of mine who has Asperger's.
Sure.
And he's very, very different from me.
Yeah.
So I just thought, I must not,
Right.
because I'm not like him at all.
Because you didn't know what Asperger's was,
So I had
right?
no idea.
Right.
Is what it came down to. And my wife and I were talking about it earlier this year. And I have always been very eccentric. I know this. It's fine. It's how I am.
It's not just the haircut.
It's not just the haircut.
No, it's a good dude, though.
However weird people think I am, they are wrong.
Yeah.
It's worse. And that's cool. But that's
Okay.
fine.
All right, so this is WWDMYK Studios. We're going to end the program now. No, go ahead. Just kidding. Anyway.
But I have always, I've always had a propensity toward math, numbers.
Yeah.
I remember things really well in that area. Even so far as to have. I was telling my wife the other day, and I didn't know other people weren't like this until I was like in my late 20s.
That is a very common discovery. Go ahead. What you're going to say is a very common discovery among people that.
Sometimes when I drive down the road, I will see, you see the speed limit signs or what road you're on. Sometimes there's two numbers at the same time.
Yeah. This way.
I have always enjoyed, and I don't intend to. Sometimes when I see two numbers together, in my head I'll multiply them or divide them. And sometimes the answer just kind of is there without me really consciously thinking about it. I've always been that way.
Yeah.
And if I'm having a bad day, and like my odometer is a palindrome for 30 seconds, I feel a little better.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know until I was almost 30 that really is abnormal. I just didn't know. And I thought
Abnormal, not in a bad way. Rare.
No, but it's
just rare.
It's
unusual.
Different than the norm.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
I thought other people might have had other things like that. They weren't numbers people. They had other weird things, but really, that's like the feeling I get when somebody gives a normal person a
when
hug.
you were in school, right?
Yeah.
And you cut from class and you went to the men's room, right? And you're like, there's some guys in there smoking, and you're in there like,
I never ran into
you're like
kids.
in there doing like magic squares and.
I would just do it at my desk. I get yelled at.
You just all right, sure. Well, I did some recreational math in my day. I've done some heavy doses of recreational math in my day.
Like what?
Tell me about when I was taking geology and I was in high school. Yeah, I was taking geology. I just for fun invented a new way to determine the square root of a number. This was something that obviously humanity has survived and done better because we have a propensity to enjoy math to some extent, and you just might have that really severe liking, math can bring pleasure. I'm a math pleasurophile too. I get off on solving complex problems, and then figuring out that if you add one to a number and then subtract one from that same number, and then there's some other, forget what the mathematical, then you can determine the square root of it. It was weird. I've reconstructed it since, and I've forgotten it since. And it's very unusual, and there's no need for that relationship to exist that I know of from first principles. But it came to me, I'm sitting in geology, and this solution for squaring came to me. This kind of thing happens a lot to me. There's others.
That is interesting.
Maybe I have Asperger's
Maybe you
too.
do.
Maybe is that a diagnostic characteristic of Asperger's? I have the DSM here somewhere.
Well, here's the thing with that. I see your DSM-4 right there.
Yeah.
Now, as of 2013
I
or
have the
14,
5 here, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my diagnosis is just autism spectrum disorder, because they don't split anything up anymore.
Yeah.
They don't say it's Asperger's, or they don't say it's.
It's not interesting.
Oh,
We're going to get to that. So
Okay.
DSM-5 here, folks. We're going to do this up. So Asperger's is in here. Let's see if anywhere in here there's anything about
I think it's in section 2.
propensity to do math. Look at, I'm opening a book. See, it's true. So, section 2. I have a complete breakdown of diagnostics of autism spectrum disorder in my book. You'd think I would know this.
He also has a book called Dr. Seuss Goes to War.
That's a good one.
This is you have a diversity of reading material.
Yeah, feel free to pull any book off
Right
of the
on.
shelf. Go to any page, and I'll tell you what's on it. Seriously, I have that.
I believe you.
The answer is words. Anyway, right. So we have the DSM-5. I doubt that it says in here that a propensity for mathematics, right?
No, that's
actually
that's a common attribute among us. But here's
right. But it's not clinically diagnostic.
correct.
That's my plan. Okay.
Some people don't like math that have Asperger's, but my parents thought I was behind.
Yeah.
So when I was 30 months, 2.5 years, I still couldn't talk.
Okay.
Had never spoken. At 36
Wow.
months, I could read to you from the newspaper. I could tell time. I was speaking in full sentences.
Yeah.
I didn't really regress, but I did delay.
Were you fully vaccinated?
I was. Now, I was born in 1988.
Mhm.
Was a less aggressive schedule. Probably, knowing what I know about MMR,
Yeah.
that I would have had in 1990,
Right.
and knowing that I think I would have had a Tdap before.
Yeah.
Yeah, MMR doesn't have aluminum.
No, that's right.
But what happens, I think the metals do. I think the metals are biopersistent.
Absolutely.
They stay. And for you might have 10% that stays.
Right.
But I might have 30.
Yeah.
Or 60, or we really don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever I had that stayed, MMR polysorbate 80 moved it, is what I think happened.
I see. So the cumulative exposure and synergistic toxicity is what you're really talking about. Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
because it's not, people want to talk about this vaccine or that vaccine. That's not really appropriate.
Yeah, and that's what the whole National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program does too. It kind of forces you to pick, like the last vaccine that you had just before you had the onset of the symptoms that led to a diagnosis for what you're calling a serious vaccine adverse event. They force you to that, when in reality, there's cumulative exposure, cumulative risk of bad health outcomes is due to cumulative exposure, right?
Right, you're exposed all the time.
Right. So if there's a husband that's slowly poisoning his wife, or vice versa, right, with I don't know, let's not give anybody ideas, but with some kind of a poison over
Organic
time, like
orange
arsenic or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Then which dose killed her?
Yeah.
Right? They all did. It was cumulative exposure because it's biopersistent. So here's the thing, right? My understanding of what aluminum hydroxide would do to an animal like a mouse, a chimp, a human, is if you have it in your system and it's circulating, it's constantly being released through cell death because the cells that take it in end up dying. So it's constantly being recirculating. It doesn't go into these compartments and stay there. It's
Right.
constantly being recirculating because it's a cytotoxin. It kills cells. And whether it's a macrophage or
And nothing
brain
kills
cell-
it, correct? I mean, it just...
Well, the kidney it can be removed by kidney filtration, but it's constantly circulating. So when these kids are growing up and they're constantly getting dose after dose of aluminum, it is silly, absolutely silly to think that the only thing that the body's going to develop immunity to is what happened to be in the vial with the aluminum.
Right.
Now there's forms of vaccines where they're actually forced together, that the antigen is combined with the aluminum to make it more specific. But if you happen to have an ongoing chlamydia infection, if you happen to have an ongoing Lyme infection, whatever you happen to have ongoing at the same time, a bacterial infection or an ear infection, and those proteins that are found in those pathogens are external antigen sources. And if you have a really good viral infection and it's really rampant, then the vaccine can actually cause you to be another aluminum-containing vaccine. Now, some people would say, look at the benefit. You got a common cold, okay? So you're getting some protection from the common cold or whatever because you're developing immunity to it. The problem is the biome of viruses, the biome of bacteria and fungus is huge and diverse, and they all have proteins, and many of those proteins look exactly like human proteins, or parts of those proteins. And we're eating a lot of food that happen to have proteins that match human proteins. So aluminum vaccines are excessively dangerous, not just in terms of autoimmunity, like, okay, this is hurting you because of the proteins that are in the pertussis, right? You get autoimmunity because of molecular mimicry with things that are in the vaccine, mm-hmm. but anything else you happen to be infected with. And the vaccine court will say, well, this is due to a pre-existing infection, not due to the vaccine.
And they have no grounds to say that at all.
Right.
It's an assumption.
Right.
International Journal of Pharmaceutical Research, February of this year, I think, there's a article by two guys about oh gosh, I always get things jumbled together in my head. But the different proteins in vaccines that lead to allergies, because essentially what is happening is your body, and you can help me kind of wade through this, but there's no guarantee that you're going to have an immunological response to the measles, for example. Right. You might have a response to an adjuvant, to a protein,
Yeah, aluminum is allergic all by itself. So right. Aluminum can be an allergen all by itself, and metals can be allergens all by themselves. But go ahead.
I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. But like all these kids with peanut allergies, there's peanut proteins in these vaccines. Some of them is there not?
Yeah, but a lot of kids come home from the doctor. You've got to get your shots this morning. We're going to take you out of school for the morning to get your shots, and before you go to school, I'm going to give you a peanut butter sandwich right after your shot. Okay, so there's listen.
So even that's enough to.
It depends on the genetics of the individual, right? Because everybody that eats a peanut butter sandwich after aluminum-containing vaccine doesn't get peanut allergy, right? So the animal studies that have been conducted that invoke peanut allergy do exactly that. Here's your aluminum hydroxide injection, mm-hmm. and here's exposure to the peanut protein, right? They literally can feed them peanut butter, and the protein itself that's similar to the human protein somehow gets past the intestinal barrier, not broken down, not digested, right? So there's partial non-digestion for some reason. But the autoimmunity that happens is due to the fact that you have a strong immune response to an antigen that the body does not recognize as self, and yet there are cells in your body, and it could be all the cells, it could be part of the cells. If you're a woman and your X chromosome, did you know that in women, half of their cells express the dad's X chromosome and half the cells express the mom's chromosome? So if you're producing a different type of protein than the whole population does, because you have a mutation that causes your protein to be one step closer or two steps closer to the antigen source, you're at higher risk of autoimmunity, and food allergy kills you because of autoimmunity. It doesn't kill you because your body's filled with peanuts. Your bloodstream is filled with peanut protein and you're having an allergic reaction to it. It kills you because of autoimmunity. And they know this, and so they try to increase exposure to the antigen from very, very small doses, really tiny microdoses, and then for treatment they try to increase the dose. And some people tolerate it well, and some people don't.
And if it doesn't work, you can always stab somebody with an EpiPen too.
Yeah, that's the other thing that really bothers me about this. So like autoimmunity, anaphylactic shock is a known adverse event to some vaccines, and yet the medical community is like, no big deal, because we vaccinate in the clinic, and if somebody has an autoimmune reaction, an anaphylaxis, we're going to treat it. It's not a big deal. They treat it like it's not a serious thing.
What if I don't want my child to go through that?
Yeah, exactly. Or what if that getting one anaphylactic shock started makes you more sensitive to future ones, right? And then you're walking down the street, somebody hands you a snack, you eat it, you don't know, right? We're good. You're not next to a clinic. People do die from anaphylaxis. There's no doubt about it. So, all right. So, back to your story. You were telling us about how you discovered you were Asperger's.
Right.
You had
Asperger's. What you do is you go, a psychologist will give a diagnosis. and I met with two. There was a couple of meetings. There was some discussion with my mother and my wife too, between these two psychologists, because they like to get a picture, especially with an adult, get a picture of what my childhood was like. Because one of the indicators is that, and I don't know if this is because I didn't argue with either of these people about vaccines, by the way.
Right.
But in an ASD diagnosis in an adult, I think by age 6, they're looking for these traits consistently all the time, and I've always been this way.
Uh-huh.
So I fit the bill. I excel in some ways. I struggle with. I'm not that articulate when I speak. I'm better when I
think
write.
most people watching this would disagree completely.
But I know some of this stuff. It's something I know a little bit about.
Okay.
I'm a little more familiar with it.
Yeah.
But you know,
you're also very comfortable. If you're in a comfortable setting, you feel,
and that's true as well. I have serious sensory overload issues.
Uh-huh.
Bad ones. The fire drills I can't do at work. I'm walking around looking for the fire with my fingers in my ears. The bright lights I don't do. The sounds I can't do. I can't touch certain touching.
Tactile, yeah.
Yeah. Some of that stuff. Not severe.
Smells.
Kind of. Not that bad, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a very serious mold allergy, and if I walk into a room that has mold in it, it takes literally no seconds. I'm an automatic mold detector. And I'm convinced that it was because I got vaccines. In retrospect, thinking about it, I got vaccinated just before I went off to my grandfather's farm to bale hay. And I remember there was 2 times when the hay was wet, and it had been baled wet, and it sat, and that's a recipe for mold.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time was no problem. I loaded it up. They were very heavy. It was like, okay, this load's going to be extra heavy because it's wet, and we need to let it dry. But the second time was at the end of the summer, and I broke out in such a huge allergic fit that my nose was bleeding. I sneezed all day long. I sneezed and sneezed and sneezed. And now if I walk into a place that's got mold in it, I have to turn around. It's okay. There's mold in there. I can't go there.
We had mold in our house. My mother and I.
Yeah.
Well, it was my mom, my dad, my sister, and me. My mom and I and my sister got really sick. They got the house. It was black mold real bad. There's a connection there. I don't know what it is.
Well, there's a syndrome. There's a syndrome of mold sensitivity.
We're also, the 3 of us are vaccine injured. Which, by the way, CDC epidemic is how many? Is it 3? Is that their threshold?
I think it's 7.
Is it 7? I
think
thought
it's
it was 3.
Yeah.
It was 3. I don't know.
That doesn't sound like an epidemic to me, but
I said that because in the household I grew up in, 3 out of the 4 of us were vaccine injured permanently and in a pretty significant way.
Mm-hmm.
So 75% is not it's not what I would call rare.
Yeah, that's true. If you got a household, a cluster of that, so your own clinical population. All right, so we're going to take a break from serious talk here. We're going to do something in Unbreaking Science. This particular podcast that we're doing at WWDNYK. There's a number of oddities around the room. You noticed them when you came in.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to do is invite my guest Joshua Bennet to pick one and bring it on screen. And the task to you is to come up with a description about why this fits Unbreaking Science to you, and then I'll tell you if that makes sense to me. Okay, so you're on. Pick one and I'll bring it over.
I'm looking. I don't know.
You said earlier you're going to pick one you didn't know. Go ahead. This is the start. We're breaking the ice here.
I would like.
Oh, by the way, you don't get to leave with it.
No,
Okay.
I would like the little glass head with the hat.
Okay, cool. There you go. Okay.
Yeah. So why did I choose this?
Yes, this is a little glass. This is a life-size glass head, actually, with a cap, with a newsboy cap on it.
When I see a hat like this, I think of like a gentleman.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I don't know if I should make that association or not. But this is an empty head. He looks like a gentleman, but I
Okay.
noticed that the head is empty.
Yeah. So being okay. My gosh, you went there.
So listen, when you're reading about, when you're on the Wild West of social media, okay, you will run into people who speak well and they're eloquent. You might picture them dressed like a nice, I don't know, in a gentleman's cap. I don't know.
Hang on, I'm going to zoom in and
This
pan down.
is really silly.
Yeah, it is. So let's get serious about this.
But you have to see what's in their head.
Hold it up so they can see. Because I zoomed in a
See?
little. There you go. Okay.
You have to see what's in their head. Do they know what they're talking about? Do you know what they're talking about? Is it internally consistent? Does it make sense? Are they relying on the logical fallacies? Are they saying things to you like, you know, your data is no good because it doesn't come from this source? That's an appeal to authority. That's what our public health agencies are doing right now. They're tossing science in the trash can, and the evidence of this is their heads are empty.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they wear nice bow ties and hats.
Okay, you know what?
No, sorry.
No, I love it. I love it. It's a great catch. I'm glad that you went there because the What We Do Not Yet Know Studios absolutely is about what's missing in a cranium.
Yeah.
And you nailed it. But there's more to this. The Newsboy cap actually has a story unto itself. And very few people know it. It's not a very important story, but it has to do with my hairline. So, you know, thick, lustrous hair, as George Costanza on Seinfeld says, is very important to me. But there's a person in Ohio who just, without ever mentioning it, just absolutely, just such lovingly try to convince me to start wearing newsboy caps without mentioning my hairline. And it's Stephanie. She is in OMAF, and she every time she's like, "When are you gonna wear that newsboy cap?" So I had one for years and never wore it, but that's an homage to Stephanie. So the newsboy cap itself, Stephanie, is an homage to you, and I hope you come over sometime and we can talk about some stuff in the studio. So.
And in no way did I mean to imply that it's always worn by people with empty skulls.
Or with receding hairline.
Yes, that too. My day's coming.
Yeah. Oh no, I like your haircut, man.
Wow.
A lot of people are doing that. A lot of people are doing the hair where it's like really short on the side. You basically, I think you went bald and you didn't shave today.
It's growing back.
So yeah, you bald the sides. A lot of people just keep it really. My son has it now, but I saw this like 50-year-old guy with it, right? And I was like, I don't know if I could pull that off, because what he did was he actually cut it on the sides really short, and then he pushed it forward like a comb forward, as opposed to like you've got the flare up, that's really sharp looking. He did the comb forward, and I'm just imagining the day when, you know, the wind comes and picks it up and he's doing this thing, like the Trump this way.
Yeah, well, no, that will be, I mean, if
This is a lot.
your mother's father is any indication, I really should be growing my hair out and enjoying it while I can.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Well, that fits well to a piece too, right? So that kind of haircut, you could just flop a piece right down and like glue it down, and you're good.
Yeah, that's right.
So you know, whatever. Anyway, I'm gonna just move him over here, or her. I haven't gendered this person. It's a unigender empty head. Both genders, male and female, and otherwise, are welcome to learn and fill their heads with knowledge.
And wear any hat they like.
Yes, absolutely, and we'll celebrate both your ignorance and the future of having a more completely full cranium. So let me just do a little plug here. This is the future of your life. If you're an IPAC supporter, we're going to be giving these as a thank you for donation for an informative publication on aluminum. It's a one-pager. So if you make the donation, you're going to be getting that. We haven't set that website up yet, but this is a beautiful window decal that you can put on your car, and you can boast to all of your friends that you're part of IPAC. You run with the pack.
Are donations to IPAC tax deductible?
Not yet. We're working on it, though.
Okay.
Yeah,
Very cool.
that's a great question. So I now have some serious
People are asking
accounting.
me that. I've had people
Oh, okay. Well, their current donations will become tax deductible once the IRS says that we're a 501c3. So retrospectively, they can request receipts. We're not there yet, and it's been a long time coming, but let me explain that. It's a great question. So people say, why isn't IPAC registered with the IRS as a 501c3 yet? And from where I come from in science, I want to have a book of work that shows we're actually doing objective research science. We're actually doing peer-reviewed science. So far, we have a publication out on aluminum. We've got another one submitted. It's difficult to get these controversial studies published. And so I wanted to build a book of work. And we teach courses online. We run conferences and seminars, which are educational, about science and about censorship with First Freedoms and so on. And so now I'm at the point where, like, yeah, we've got a book of work. We can passes the sniff test about whether we're doing something that society says, oh yes, that falls under. We're not an advocacy group. Every time I go to a state capitol, and meet with legislators, 100% of the time I say that I can't tell you whether I'm for or against this particular bill, and you'll never see me saying that I'm for or against a particular candidate. So you, as an IPAC individual, as an employee, you haven't, volunteer employee, you haven't given up your right to do that as an individual.
Right.
But anybody that works with IPAC should identify themselves in their capacity when they're talking to a legislator as, I'm here on behalf of IPAC, and I'm educating you, so I can't tell you whether I'm for or against. Or you have to say, I work for a not-for-profit, but I'm taking that hat off right now, and I'm representing myself to my own representative here, right, as a constituent, and I'm speaking as a constituent. There's just very simple rules like that, and I think we talked about this through email with the group that you're affiliated with. So, the fact of the matter is, I have a hard time choosing political candidates these days. I have a hard time personally, not on the basis of like I'm a recovering Democrat. Right, but I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool Republican. So I registered as independent, right? Certainly my views can be seen as libertarian. For anybody where it matters, where I personally stand on any political issues, I'm a constitutionalist. So if the Constitution says that it's okay, then you're following the law, then it's okay. But sometimes the Constitution is wrong. And that's why what I love about America is that we can actually change the laws as we go if we find them to be wrong, if we find them to be harmful. So I choose not to affiliate with any particular political party at this time in my life. There was another time I registered independent and then went back to Democrat for a while to participate in the primary. But politics is important to me, but it's really not. It's like people ask me about religion. What's your thoughts on religion? And I'm like, well, it's in the Constitution. You have the right to practice. I will die defending your right to practice religion if I have to. I would do that. If Mexico invades the United States and says you're no longer allowed to practice religion, put me in the front lines, because I think that it's important that people have that right because it's in the Constitution. So as an evolutionary biologist, I find myself defending freedoms to worship from time to time by educating people that vaccine exemptions, philosophical and religious exemptions, are so important because they're actually a safety valve. Because you didn't know, there's no pre-indicator that you and your family were at risk of any particular autoimmune condition or adverse event from vaccines, demyelinating disorder and so on. And because and science has not shown that those specific vaccines cause what you're saying. Right. Science is behind. Science doesn't know everything.
Not shown it on purpose. Nobody's ever asked.
Whether it's intentional or not, I mean, there's this theory that we have a bunch of people that are doing this conspiracy of good, where they think they're doing the right thing. Gosh, we wouldn't want people to think that, yes, a small subset of people get demyelinating disorder, but look at the millions of lives we're saving, and therefore, no, you don't want them to know. They should never know that it can happen to some people. But we have this era of individualized medicine now where we should be able to predict, like we can with some chemotherapy and other treatments, which patients are going to have a serious problem with this particular medicine. And in that era of individualized medicine, the old, adage that vaccines are perfectly safe and effective for everyone it's going to put some people in harm's way, and those people have figured it out and they've gotten together through social media. So it's a completely different world. We're not going to be having the same conversation in 5 years or 6 years, because in the states where they did take away religious and philosophical exemptions, anybody that does vaccinate and gets injured, they're going to become activists. And so the vaccine risk-aware community grows constantly every day, right, with more and more, sadly. So anyway, anything else you want to jaw about? We got another 15 minutes or so, or more. Let me put your name up here. This is cool. I can just go.
No, I haven't. I can't really see over there.
Yeah, sorry, you can't see the monitor here. Overlay 1. You can overlay 2 in.
See, this isn't fair.
Look at
He
that.
gets to watch
that.
it while we talk.
Look at
We
that.
should start over.
Yeah. Yeah, so then see it says Joshua Bennet.
Oh, very cool.
Right on, and then
So-
overlay 2 out. And then I can put this little bug in here. Anu helped me with this. WWDNYK Studio.
Oh, that's cool.
But it's blocking my head. I don't want it to block my head. Overlay 1 out. There we go. Okay. So, let's talk about IPAC, about what you like about IPAC and why it is the future of science and how we're going to know things.
Well, this is what I think. So, you can't run from science forever. You can't run from, I mean, truly, we have, 40 years ago, autism was like 1 in 10,000.
Yeah.
Right. Now it's like 1 in 40 or 50. I don't remember.
Depends. You cited in your article 1 in 35 in New Jersey. Depends on where
Yeah.
you are.
And, people like Andrew Wakefield and I think Stephanie Seneff
Yep.
are saying some pretty horrifying things about where those numbers are going.
Right.
And where they're going quickly. People in my lifetime naturally, and in your natural lifetime, I think everybody's going to know. Everybody's going to know. Because when, 40, 50, 60% of boys are autistic in 15 or 20 years, if that's where this goes.
Yeah.
It may not be that high. But everybody's going to know. People are not going to trust.
Do you think that's why they
Industry.
want to do away with the philosophical? Do you think? Let me do this. Do you think that's why they want to do away with the philosophical and philosophical and religious exemptions, so that there's no family out there that has no autistic children?
There's
to
no
say,
control group
right?
with that.
Yeah,
That's kind of what I think.
yeah,
Because you can't, you look at, I just did my master's thesis for law school on SB 276, California's stupid law.
Yeah.
Less than 1% of kindergartners, like 0.7% of kindergartners were unvaccinated across the state.
yeah.
And that was what brought SB 277. And then they said we knew we were going to have more medical exemptions increase after we took away the non-medical exemptions. They said we anticipated that. Richard Pan and what's her name? What's the attorney? Dorit Rice? Dorit Rice.
Oh, the
Rubenstein
faculty
Rice.
member. Yeah. Uh-huh.
At Hastings College of Law, I think in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
She and Richard Pan wrote an article in Pediatrics November of last year, and they said that some schools after SB 277 had ME rates of 20%, so they knew that they were fraudulent medical exemptions. Now, that's ridiculous. This is not, that's a
knowledge claim that's unwarranted. is
it's a
what you're
non
saying.
sequitur.
Right.
They say
It's a presumption.
right.
And that's what a lot of the
That's my train of
science.
thought.
Well, what you train of
You
thought.
asked me about IPAC.
Yeah. Well, I asked you. Did you think that the reason why they're doing away with philosophical and religious exemptions is so that they can't a population of non-vaccinating families or ex-vaccinating lineages in the population can't say, "What are you guys doing over there with all that autism? We don't have any autism."
Yes, I think there's that autoimmunity, allergy,
Yeah.
neurological problems. Absolutely.
Certainly with Anthony Mawson's survey study, although I criticized it for being a survey study, you have to say, well, people might want to really help out the cause and change, exaggerate whatever. That's the nature of it. If it's kind of, you're surveying people, they can change their answers because they want to drive the science from their desktop when they're online, or work from their laptop when they're online. But that's why we need more science. I think Dr. Mawson would be the first to say, yeah, there's limitations to survey studies. So you found IPAC, and you're like, okay, here's this organization. It's
IPAC found me.
okay. We found you. How did we find you? Yeah, I contacted you.
I was looking for an editor.
Oh yeah.
Remember?
Yeah, that's right.
I was like, who's this guy? Maybe he'll edit my paper.
Oh yeah. And I was impressed with the depth of acumen. This as you can see, Joshua has a depth of acumen, and his head is not empty.
Mm.
By the way, that glass head can also be looked at as an open mind. There's duality. I like to focus on duality sometimes. It's not just ignorance. An ignorant mind is an opportunity to teach.
Hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
But,
no, you go ahead. I'm asking you about IPAC. What's your hope for IPAC? Where do you want us to go? What's your thoughts on it?
the public is going to need, the public is not science. We're not all scientists, just like we're not all mechanics or we're not all physicians or whatever.
Yeah.
There's going to be no trust in the medical industrial complex in the U.S. because that's what it is.
Mhm.
People are waking up all the time. Allopathy is about money.
Right.
They're seeing that.
Right.
And they're going to need a place to go to learn about clinical research and science and how to reduce human pain and suffering.
Yeah.
And they're going to say, I don't know if I want to learn about this from Merck or
Right.
Johnson & Johnson or whomever.
Yeah. So that's some good insights. What we want to represent is a continuation, carry the flame of actual science forward. Because the for-profit science that allows bias to drive the result, that allows profit to drive the result, I call that science-like activities. And there's a big difference between science and scientism. Scientism is an undue faith in
Right.
scientists. It's appeal to authority. Because of scientists, like Bill Nye said it.
Right.
I don't know when's Bill Nye's last peer-reviewed publication? I'm curious about that. But when's the last time he actually ran an experiment? I love Bill Nye. I brought up my kids on Bill Nye because, well, I want them addicted to science because science is cool. But when we look at back to our original discussion, we look at the unusual events that surround doing studies in vaccine. I can't call it science. I don't think it qualifies as science. I think the epidemiological correlation studies fall under a category at least of soft science. Like in psychology, you can't really do experiments, and in sociology, you can't really do experiments, and so you have to do correlation studies. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? All the problems that are gone over in the boot camp episodes of Unbreaking Science with science came out of psychiatry because the results are not reproducible. Right? They can't now that psychiatry tried to make itself a hard science, and they're trying to do biological psychiatry, and they're not just doing phenomenological psychiatry. Oh, it's because your mother, said hello to too many men. That's why you don't like this kind of thing, right? This kind of psychoanalysis.
You got bad blood.
Well, that's
It's more
genetics,
sophisticated
right?
than that, but
Right, phenomenological is like in autism we have this theory of mind thing by Simon Baron Cohen, where the theory of mind is kind of like the last vestige of phenomenological. That an individual with severe autism can't form in his or her mind the idea that another mind might exist. That's a theory of mind. It can't form the idea. It can't formulate that. How do you know? How do you know they don't have a more advanced theory? They just can't communicate it. If the inputs are screwed up, the outputs are screwed up, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. Right? We can do neurodiversity all day long. The inputs are developmentally different. The outputs are developmentally different. It's the same thing. But let's get down to brass tacks. If the studies at the epidemiology level can't test causality, they don't accommodate genetics in terms of genetic risk, then what do we know? What we know is that we don't know a lot. And that's why this is called the What We Do Not Yet Know Studios. All of all of the epidemiological studies led the IOM to say time and time and time again, there's not sufficient studies to determine causality. Those who had a translational agenda to promote vaccines said, oh, that means that it doesn't cause this, it doesn't mean that means that it doesn't cause that. When in reality, they never said that. What they said was, there's not enough. So we do not yet know. That's what they said.
And then why? Why are there the list that was sent to President Trump by, I think, AAP?
Mm-hmm.
Couple 150 studies on there.
No, it
200.
was 46 studies.
40. Are those all? What are those? I'm aware of that list.
Those
I haven't
are
read those all.
a collection of studies that include epidemiological studies on the question of MMR and autism,
Okay.
and on the question of thimerosal safety.
Okay.
And in the evaluation that I did, the comparative evaluation, I asked, did it have
That's not even exhaustive. There's other issues besides, right? I mean,
Oh, no, that's, listen, right, so do vaccines cause autism? I don't know, let's study them. They haven't studied vaccines.
Exactly.
Right? What have they studied? They've studied,
like one or two.
yeah, MMR,
TDAP.
probably 95% of the studies are on MMR, and pertussis-containing vaccine. So, but those studies are focused on, they're epidemiological studies, they're retrospective studies, which means that the data already exists in a database, and you take it and you look backwards for trends, or you look backwards for association. The IOM actually rejected 17 out of 22 studies in one of their rounds. They had to go every 2 years. They're supposed to do this assessment on causality for serious adverse events under the law. And they've stopped doing it, which is against the law. They're not doing, they're breaking the law. So they disbanded and they renamed themselves. They don't exist. So they can't break the law because they don't exist. Isn't that clever?
I'm gonna try that.
Yeah, I'm no longer myself. I self-identify.
My name's Ted.
Ted Wood.
I don't know, but there's no warrants out for my arrest.
I identify as a fully vaccinated 18-year-old.
Yeah.
So I'm clear. If any, I'm good.
But
But anyway, they were underpowered. They didn't use covariates correctly. They corrected for things like health outcomes that are correlated with autism. And once you correct for that, of course, those signals.
You're just kind of showing your hand.
Well, now, yeah, but if you don't look closely, you still have a publication. After correcting for mother's income, poor nutrition, after correcting for gestational age, low birth weight, and birth weight, all right, and after correcting for, why don't we correct for whether or not they have autism? Once you correct for somebody that's got autism, then there's no signal for autism, right? So what these should be doing I've never been one to just make complaints, and everybody knows this all the way from my PhD dissertation advisor and committee. I'm not a deconstructionist. If I find a flaw with something, I want a solution, right? And if I want to celebrate a solution that's actually viable. What they should have done is what we're doing with Dr. Paul Thomas's study at IPAC, or his data at this IPAC study. We're looking at these risk factors that are not as risk factors. We're not looking at them as covariates that could also explain, right? Or explain. It's not either or. So if you're low income, we don't have that data, but if you're low income, early gestation, like the early premature birth, basically, right? And low birth weight, and if you had eczema sometime before the year of 2. Or if you had a family history of autoimmunity and you're vaccinated, what does that look like to people that had all those same risk indicators, but they were not vaccinated? That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So in other words, we're using the covariates as risk predictors, co-predictors, not something to correct instead of. And that's prediction model. That's machine learning based optimized prediction model. We have a number of different kind of models that we're going to use. And if you want to support that, ICWA has a website. There's a Gretchen Fagan put up a GoFundMe, or you can just go to IPAC and do. The best way to do it is a monthly donation, because as you know, we're doing study after study of open questions. Well, we don't yet know. So, but these studies that were sent to POTUS, they were not collected by the AAP. They were collected by a pro-vaccine,
well, of course,
right, group, a small group of pro-vaccine people. And then AAP said, look at the studies that we collected, and then they got 800 other organizations to sign on to it. But any tiny little a glance at any of those studies. There's one study from Poland that was like, I don't know, 19 versus 17 people or something crazy, or 97 versus 103, I think it was.
How is that not underpowered?
It absolutely is underpowered, and I've done the power calculations based some of the IPAC research that we've done is to actually calculate the power of the ability to define a relative risk over a range of relative risks. So we're not taking the relative risk
based on the size of your sample.
Based on the size. The question is, can you find any positive relative risk at all?
Okay.
That's the question, not the one that was reported by the study, because then we don't have to assume their effect size. That's a technical thing, but it's very important. If we can say that this study couldn't have found any biologically significant or clinically significant positive relative risk because it didn't have enough power, that wasn't large enough, like you said earlier, and this is what I love about your mind, you basically have done nothing. You might as well have not done the study. So
I mean, I know that no one's ever been to the moon because I flew 100 747s up there. None of them left. Couldn't get out of the atmosphere. It's never been done. I know it.
exactly
There's
right.
an entire category of vehicle I didn't try.
Exactly
And
right.
I don't. If I don't go there, I'm always gonna be like this guy.
Right.
In a bad way.
That's a good analogy. The analogy that I used at the debate that we won at the One Conversation event, because the other side didn't show up, was
I didn't know of this. Tell me about it.
oh yeah. So there's this Shannon Kroner and others put together a debate that was supposed to involve Peter Hotez. It was supposed to involve Paul Offit, and they have emails from these people, and from these people, I think it was supposed to involve the big guy, the guy that said that.
Z-Dog or
No,
Richard
no.
Pan?
He's not a big dog.
Well, I don't know.
Z-Dog is not a big guy. Z-Dog is a character. I mean, the guy who gave the testimony in Michigan, and he was interviewed we have 9 hours of his testimony.
Stanley Plotkin.
Thank you, Dr. Stanley Plotkin. All these people were invited to debate. Bob Sears, me, Del Bigtree, Sherry Tenpenny, Tony Bark, and so on. And we're on the stage. There was a couple of others. I don't want to leave anybody out. David Lewis, and of course from Canada, the Mouse guy, Canada, Vancouver area. It'll come to me.
Ted?
No. Chris Shaw.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I do
So,
know who that is.
What I had to do there was go vaccine scientists working on objectively. Chris Shaw. I had to
He is at
pull that out
the
of my
University of
hierarchical file structure.
British Columbia.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, sorry, Chris. But the point was, we showed up for a debate, and in that debate, they didn't show up, and these women have emails saying, like Peter Hotez, he said, I would lose my job if I did this. I want to keep my job, so I'm not going to do this. They originally agreed to do it, so they abdicated, so we won the debate. By definition, they what is that called? They forfeited.
Man, what is your job worth to you? What's it worth to you?
Right. Yeah, well, they knew that they couldn't win. They knew that we had an answer to every claim that they made. They know that we have a valid criticism of, and it's a lethal criticism of, so we would have taken them to the mat. There's no doubt about it. So they didn't show up. They forfeited.
Well, this discussion is not happening in the public. It's not.
Well, that's why this podcast exists. Like, Peter Hotez went on Joe Rogan. Great guy. Joe Rogan's got a lot of questions for Peter Hotez, and he asks a lot of great questions. But Joe Rogan, unfortunately, bought hook, line, and sinker the line that because people with autism have early changes in their brain, that must mean that it's not the vaccines. As if there's not a vaccine on day one of life, hepatitis B.
Yeah.
As if that signature might not be a signature of future vaccine injury or ongoing vaccine injury. As if moms don't now vaccinate during pregnancy, right? Peter Hotez didn't tell him the whole story. He misled Joe Rogan terribly, and Joe should take a look at that, or Joe should have me or Del Bigtree or Bobby Kennedy or somebody to address each point made by Peter Hotez, so Joe has a better understanding.
All of those questions can be answered well.
Oh, we have a great understanding of where, right? And so I was so upset by when the director of the NIH, Francis Collins, said because of these studies, this is the same thing Peter Hotez claimed, because we can detect early changes in the human brain of kids with autism, quote, close your ears because I'm about to lie to you, before they're vaccinated. We know that it wasn't. We know that,
day one?
we know that it wasn't right. We know that it wasn't the vaccine. When in reality, the study never, ever, ever looked at vaccination status. They didn't have that variable in the study. And what that actually means is, to me, that means that Francis Collins is promoting non-scientific knowledge claims for a public health policy purpose, aka propaganda, and I called for his resignation. I have a blog article calling for his resignation. Because if we're going to have a society with public health policies that are based on science, we're not going to do shit like that.
You know, you're saying some pretty dangerous and kind of out there things right now.
Oh.
Somebody, I think, should take you to task for all this misinformation that you're saying. And it's so obscene what you're doing that it should be really easy to correct you.
Guys, are you serious about that?
Well, I mean, if the things that these things that you're saying, they're just crazy.
Right,
I mean,
right.
you're way out there. Somebody should get on you. And it should be pretty easy for them to shut you up.
Yeah, that's exactly
just
Joe's
prove
point.
you,
Exactly.
right?
Joe Rogan's point was, and he made an excellent point. He said, well, I mean, if you're so right, then it should be pretty easy for you guys to debate him, so why not do the debate?
They won't do it.
And he said, I think Hotez said something like, well, I don't want to give them the equal time. I don't want to validate their positions. It make this false equivalency argument that we're not equivalent to them because, well, we have it wrong. We are so wrong that we shouldn't be given any airtime, which brings about the whole censorship thing. The whole reason why this channel on YouTube might someday be censored is because we're speaking things that is so
Nobody
dangerous.
has an answer for.
It's so dangerous that people might know what we're talking about that we have to be shut down. And so, no, in reality, Joe, I think, has a better... I've listened to tons of his shows. He has a great mind. He has a very keen intellect. And he loves a good intellectual debate. He wants to know. And he goes there and crazy things like UFOs, and he brings people in about, cryptozoology, alternative histories, deep civilization. He's got a great show. I would love to be there to counter the points where, he could play Joe Rogan's question, Joe could play his question, and Peter Hotez's response, and then I could say, okay, well, actually, Joe, this is what you need to consider.
I don't know if the science is settled, which that's a dumb thing to say, but it is said. So if the science is settled, this should be an easy task.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I should be unable to have any counterpoints. Right.
Merck should be able to sue RFK Jr.
Yeah, and by the way,
Shut him up.
Peter Hotez is not,
Wouldn't that be fun?
and he is not a developmental, he knows nothing about neurodevelopment. Peter Hotez knows nothing about autoimmune disorders.
What is his...
Infectious disease.
Okay.
So we have people that understand things like,
The silos.
Yeah, specialization, right?
Yeah.
Now, he has a daughter that he has told the public has autism, and he's put out his book, My Daughter Rachel does, no vaccines did not cause my daughter Rachel's autism. Is that from a clinical trial? Is that from a randomized clinical trial, a large one with proper controls? And no, it's not. It's his observation. And so how does he know that didn't happen unless she's unvaccinated?
And how does he know that didn't happen to someone else, too?
Yeah, absolutely.
It is presumably, I would say that, there are unvaccinated people who are autistic here and there, correct?
Sure. Yeah.
Theoretically, a person who also has autism may have received it from, I admit that I cannot know if vaccines cause my autism. I believe that it's the primary etiological factor,
Right.
but I will never be able to drill it down.
Have you had your body tested for other types of toxins? Because there's this weird thing, as you know, you more than most people have read my paper on the detoxification deficiency syndrome. That I
Yes.
think autism is.
Yep.
And there's this problem with causality because most people who have autism also have their bodies chock full of all kinds of other toxins.
Well, mine, again, you know, it was a 25-year time span about, but in 1990, something made me the way I am.
Mm-hmm.
In 2015, I had my flu shot, and my neurological system was like, see ya.
Don't beg the question. Did you have your blood tested for other toxins?
Yes, I don't have the results yet.
Okay.
I went to Michigan.
How'd you like that, folks? I took him to task right there. Don't beg the question.
Well, I was still thinking my way
I know.
through.
I'm a little rude that way.
But
sorry.
I don't even. I just had genetic testing done for like they're looking for MTHFR and some other common markers of vaccine injury.
Yeah. So if you have some genes that apparently predispose you to Asperger's or autism, in the absence of any study that considers those genetics, genes don't rule out environment. And in fact, the environmental and genetic studies that have been done have been siloized, as you said. They do either environmental studies, and there seems to be an association, or they do genetic studies, and they say, look, here's all these genes. There's 850 genes. No gene explains more than 1% of the liability, but altogether it was about 50% of genes and environmental factors, and they know this because you can do studies where you just look at genes and you can say genes can only explain this much, so the rest must be environment. That's not the full study. The full study would be randomized prospective clinical trial with genetics that says, okay, here's the gene factor, here's the environment factor, and here's the gene by environment interaction term. That you need to just do hypothesis testing on those three terms. And what's likely to happen is that we're at 50% liability for genes and environment without looking at environment, without looking at the interaction term. What's likely to happen is that they're going to find it in a model where you have a significant interaction term, the genes variable is going to not become significant, and the environment factor is not going to become significant because it's explained by the interaction. So in your case, if you do genetics, you got MTHFR, look at, even if you do other toxins, you got all these toxins, you still can't rule out vaccines because the vaccines may have made you more susceptible to other toxins, right?
I would think so. If autism is, a deficiency in your ability to detox, I would think it would naturally follow that further vaccination after your autism onset would be more likely to result in problems. Restroom break.
Oh yeah, go right ahead. I'll rant on mitochondrial.
Commercial?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll cut to commercial here. Overly two out and cut to me. So, what he's talking about is that mercury can cause mitochondrial dysfunction. Aluminum can cause mitochondrial dysfunction. Both of them can cause endoplasmic reticulum stress, where the endoplasmic reticulum becomes filled with unfolded proteins because the proteins have an aberrant shape than they should, probably because of a mutation. And those proteins with an aberrant shape then cause that cell to undergo the unfolded protein response, which means that the cell goes forward and either slows down transcription or slows down translation, or transcription being from DNA to RNA, or slows down translation, which is from RNA to protein, to slow those things down so that the clearance of the toxic proteins, the unfolded, improperly folded proteins, can be accomplished through the Golgi apparatus of the cell. Mercury harms the Golgi apparatus itself, and aluminum likewise has a similar effect, and so that causes the cell to be unable to detoxify by getting those proteins out. Well, the problem is the aluminum in the cell in the first place. So the third option in the unfolded protein response is to die. It's called a process called apoptosis. In this apoptosis process, the cell dies and it purges out its contents. Or it dies through necrosis, which is more of a seeping out of the cellular contents. The necrosis, seeping out, or the apoptosis, releases these strangely folded proteins, and we know that kids with autism have very, very strange serum protein profiles, so much so that it's a potentially useful biomarker for diagnosis. And they also release the aluminum or the offending aluminum or mercury, and that release of that metal then causes this recirculation where other cells can pick it up and the process is repeated. And so the paper that we mentioned earlier, the cellular detoxification deficiency syndrome, is published in online journal Autism Open Access. And it goes through the literature on the unfolded protein response and the ER stress. I call it the ER hyperstress theory. It's backed by so much evidence that at the cellular level, the molecular level, this is what's going on with vaccine contents, and at the organ level and at the systems level, that we certainly have a very good handle on it, how it could happen. And Joshua, in his paper, mentioned that we don't know if Dr. Lyons-Weiler is correct because more science.
I think you are.
Because more science is needed, and I agree with him 100%. We need studies that look at the unfolded protein response. There's ways to measure it. Inject human vaccines dosed per animal at the same schedule. Put the entire schedule into a mouse. Put saline into a control mouse, like 12 or 15 mice. And then look at the cellular and molecular level if we're seeing the unfolded protein response in the brain. Now, Chris Exley just has a new aluminum commentary out, in addition to all of the studies that he's done where we find aluminum in the brain of kids with autism, people with autism, and other conditions like Parkinson's. In his new commentary, he says that the aluminum exposure is an acute toxicity. And, we found that. Lyons-Weiler and Ricketson found that. We calculated a minimum safe level, and then we found that the peaks are acutely toxic. But our most recent study in aluminum that was just submitted with co-authors Paul Thomas, Elaine LaJolie, and Grant McFarland, two IPAC faculty members, great people. We found that up to the first 7 months of life, kids are in chronic toxicity in 70% of their days.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Now, I'm not saying that our MSL is correct either. The FDA doesn't have an MSL for a day one infant of aluminum. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as a published day, right? And in the paper with Ricketson, we lamented. We said the only published limit on aluminum is 4 to 5 micrograms per kilogram for people that have impaired kidney function.
And am I on?
Yeah.
Was that published by you, or no?
Yeah, Lyons-Weiler and Ricketson.
But the
MSL.
only published safe limit.
No, the 4 to 5 micrograms per kilogram per day comes from
Okay.
comes from
I
the
misunderstood.
discovery that people that had kidney problems when they were given dialysis that included the solution included aluminum hydroxide would develop serious encephalopathy and other problems. And so the 4 to 5 micrograms is a limit for injected doses for people with impaired kidney function. Well, in this new study that's not published as under peer review, we cite the literature that thanks to Trish, thank you Trish, Neuenschwander, she sent me this literature that infants only have 20% capacity of their renal function. The glomerular filtration rate is only 20%. And so they have impaired kidneys on the day one of life. And I was emphasizing NICU, of course. Many infants in the NICU have problems with their kidneys. And there's no consideration about glomerular filtration rate in vaccination. You can measure glomerular filtration rate and say, okay, how's your kidneys these days?
Yeah, but you actually don't have to do that because vaccines are safe and effective.
Oh, never mind. We're going to shut down the
You
studio.
don't have to check.
I
heard it on the TV.
I have a laptop for sale.
It's
I've got
fine.
cameras. We got microphones. We're going to pack up the shop and go
Everybody
home.
go home.
Yep, just go home and have a good time. Recreational vaccination is it today. Got some dealers that I got. You got any contacts for me? I'm looking for some vaccines today. I want some good stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, listen. Public health is a very, very serious thing. We're here. We have a good time, but public health is a very serious thing. I know that there are many people who I know, who I love and respect, who actually want natural immunity from an infection for their kids and for themselves. And if that's their choice, that's their choice. I mean, modern medicine will help people from getting seriously ill from measles infection, let's say.
Sure.
But there's an area that needs to be studied. This is another thing we don't yet know. Are the people who are at most risk of being harmed by vaccines, seriously, also the people who would have the highest mortality and morbidity from natural infection of the same proteins? In the vaccine, the proteins are packaged with an adjuvant or not, and they come in a vial. In an infection, the proteins come in the form of a virus or a pathogen, a bacterium that's replicated in your body. What if it's the same population? That the people who get serious adverse events from vaccines and become X-vaxxers because they don't want that risk would also be at special risk from the pathogens.
How do you figure something like that out?
Well, I would think that would be all nearly impossible to do today because we have modern medicine. It would be unethical to not treat someone for measles infection to see if they die, right? It's one of these imponderables, you know, these unanswered questions that we might not ever know. But it has consequences for the way I think people think about natural infection. That, oh, no problem, I'll just, you know, my kids are good at natural infection, they'll have lifelong immunity, and that's great. It is great to have lifelong immunity. It absolutely is great to have lifelong immunity if you survive the infection. So, you know, this is not a criticism, this is just, you know, a series of observations. But anyway, Joshua, what's your next thing? What's coming up for you next?
I have my law thesis is being reviewed right now, hopefully for publication. I have a piece to turn into the Pennsylvania Patient Safety Authority, hopefully tomorrow or Monday. I have the thing with you.
Yep.
That I have to do. I haven't looked at yet.
He's looking at me like I'm a professor or something. That's kind of cool.
Wow.
Anyway, there's no due date on that, by the way.
What else?
That's a fun one.
And I need to. I'm applying to some PhD programs that I'd like to stay in my field. I like what I do.
Yeah.
I like being on my end of the continuum in healthcare.
Yeah.
But the reality is, healthcare management and healthcare administration is completely disconnected from, in my opinion, it's disconnected from patient outcomes. Probably in long-term care, where I'm at, it's the most connected with patient outcomes, and it's still, in my view, is not that much. And I think as you get toward like acute care and other stuff, it's even less. And again, of course, I just speak for myself. That's only my opinion.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, I mean, there's a ton of medical policies and practices that are out there for everything that, you know, all of these specialties and so on. Patient safety is a great area to get into, but there's so much resistance, right? There's resistance because there's so many third rails. Like, to me, I think that the ultimate use of AI in medicine wouldn't be to monitor the patients, it would be to monitor the doctors. Right? So there's automatic feedback on which practices have the highest and lowest morbidity or mortality, right? Which doctors are most proficient. If there's a cardiologist out there, which one has the highest number of patients dying from heart attacks?
right.
And the way that you do, of course, that's political suicide for any doctor that says, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's have a grade me on what I'm doing, right, in terms of patient outcomes. But this could be done with de-identified patient data and with de-identified doctors. And the doctors only get a notification of where they rank next to their peers. And then they're also everybody's given a report of these are the practices that are saving the most lives, these are the practices that are having the best outcome, okay? In real time, a continuous ongoing observational study that gives feedback in real time. And then they can say, okay, well, do we have confidence in this? It all depends on how the data are crunched. All of the epidemiological stuff that people do, retrospective, could be automated. It could be totally automated for every health outcome. Total health outcome awareness would be really cool for major medical systems. Total health outcome awareness is absolutely necessary if we're going to turn around this terrible rate of chronic illness that's happening in the United States. I think if we get an AI that informs doctors, hey, you know, you're having a pretty crappy year. You know, you fell 10 10 positions in the rank. What's going on?
Well,
What I did was I started using, this new drug from Corporation X, and I wasn't doing that before. Maybe I shouldn't do that anymore.
that day might come. On my end of it, we're already seeing a lot of what's called value-based purchasing,
Yeah.
which is basically, in my opinion, it is the government's way to steer dollars towards healthcare providers who have better outcomes, because then you get more bang for your buck.
Oh, that's cool.
Um,
That's a good use of government. Oh my gosh, people, we discovered a good use of
well,
government here.
there are two sides of that coin too,
Okay.
because like in my capacity as a nursing home administrator, like all of us that run nursing homes are about to also functionally run an insurance company.
Yeah.
Because what's going to happen is, we get, you have the bundle payment system now where you get so many dollars and you spend it on treating this person, and if you run out, then you eat the extra cost. And
Yeah. Well, how much of what you see in your line of work is driven by the fact that practice X is more profitable than practice Y?
Well, I don't know. If I get people, they're sick, in my opinion, mostly based on lifestyle choices. And now, I when I say that, I do not mean to impugn those choices. I truly don't. I'm speaking cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
If you do X, Y, Z,
Right.
you are more likely to have this outcome.
Sure.
If you eat, sometimes we have rehab patients that are quite young because they have had a heart attack or something, and they're in their 40s.
Smoking 2 packs a day, you're probably not going to be, yeah.
And sometimes I've had those people and they didn't earn it. They just, something happened to them. They had a healthy lifestyle. I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly.
Well, I mean, let me ask it more generally. Do you see a bias in the actual health options, the care options in nursing homes that you say, we're doing okay, but we could do better. It's just that's really expensive. To us, it's not profitable, or the insurance company won't cover that.
The second thing happens to us all the time. The first thing doesn't, for the most part.
It's the same thing, right?
Affect
So if
that
insurance
much.
won't cover it, somebody else has got to pay for it. See,
Yes.
You are young enough to not know. This is what we do not yet know. You are young enough to not know that healthcare used to be 100% not-for-profit. It was considered unethical to turn a profit. And the way, if you had to give care and it was going to cost you a dime, it was going to cost you a dime. If you had to, okay, it doesn't matter. That life is more important than my money.
I think a lot of healthcare operators think that way too. Where they will value the patient over the profit.
Yeah.
But the reality is, in the U.S., there are more and more sick people. There are government healthcare spending continues to increase.
So the volume. You're talking volume.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
there has to be per
Profit by
capita
volume.
is going to have to start decreasing.
Everybody's a
not
little
enough
sick,
money.
so we can just push the volume and we get profit on the margin. But more to the point, I guess, if we look at the kind of cabal between insurance companies and major medical systems, there's some backroom dealing there about how much is the patient going to, from a patient's perspective, I've seen it time and time and time again, where a patient will say, well, I went in there and they told me that they're not sure what my copay is going to be on this one because the insurance company has to talk to the doctor's office and they're going to determine who's going to pay what percentage. I don't know if you see that in your line of work, but it happens all the time for really expensive things. Like, well, they're not sure if they're going to cover it because.
We have that where we have to ask for a deal or.
Well, ask for a deal. Okay, so we'll cover 46% of
carve-outs.
it, right? And carve-outs are called. Okay, so I imagine, and I don't have any data or evidence for this, but I imagine that system at the highest levels would become kind of a trade-off. Like, okay, we'll give you, this level of care for cardiomyopathy if you pick up another percentage over here in this other, pediatric oncology or something like that. Do you see that happening at like the business level of, or can you envision that might be a possibility at the business administrative level.
Yes, because we kind of operate in a system where, you know, the scorecards actually matter now. They never have to me. They used to only matter. I mean, you get in trouble with your boss if when they hired you, your CMS was 5 stars, and now
What's a
you're 2.
CMS?
CMS starts Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services rates all nursing homes in the United States on a 1 through 5 star rating that they update what's called the technical users manual like twice a year.
Okay.
It is a very data oriented thing.
Yeah.
It's helpful. There are a lot of good things you can kind of size up your facility. The data has its limitations. The whole method kind of promotes a one-size-fits-all medicine.
Yeah.
So
So
there's limitations with
the
it.
homogenization, right? So in this book, Cures versus Profits, I'm going to pitch this one too. In this book, Cures versus Profits, after analyzing 16 or 17 different major areas of biomedicine in terms of how do we get clinical practices that are maximally effective in terms of health outcomes in an era in which profit has some influence on those decisions, I came to the conclusion that it has a homogenizing effect on care options, and that's not necessary. It's an oversimplification. See, we have a complex clinical population with many different kinds of problems, and we want to move towards individualized care, but we have an oversimplified system. So we need to build a more complex system that can learn. I'm for this kind of like AI-based evaluation. When I say AI, nobody's making a decision on a patient based on a computer, but it's giving you an evaluation that says, over the last 1,000 patients that had this condition that came through, this is what you could have possibly done different for this subset or for that subset or for that subset. And then the human mind filters that feedback. That's what I'm thinking an AI would be useful for.
Yeah, obviously we don't have anything like that. That would be very cool. I think, you know, built into the, we're going to see, in my industry, we're seeing the concerns about money are coming.
Yeah.
You know, 2 years ago, hospitals began being held accountable for some of my outcomes.
Yeah.
I'm a downstream provider.
Oh, yeah.
You get sick, you go to the hospital, you know, or
Sure.
let's say you get a new knee or something.
Yep.
You go to the hospital, give you a new knee.
Yep.
When I started doing this work, you would come to my nursing home, and I just if you had Medicare, I'd just have you while I had you. If you needed 100 days, you can get 100, but you get a lot of mileage out of your Medicare stuff. Now it's like I am under immense pressure to do two things.
Yeah.
That at times are, you do one well by not doing the other.
Yeah.
So I have to get you back home quickly, 14 days-ish, and I have to keep you from going back to the hospital. Well, if I got you from the hospital, and 10 years ago, people needed 4, 5, 6 weeks to get their knees or their hips done, and obviously, people will vary.
Sure.
And now I have 14 days. It's more likely across the spectrum that you're going to go back to the hospital after I send you home.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But now now the hospitals will start getting penalty, and this happened like 2 years ago. They get a 2% penalty if my numbers are bad.
Yeah.
Well, now my downstream provider is the home health. I think in November of this year, I'm going to start getting the penalty if their outcomes are bad.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be an insurance company telling people,
that makes
I'll
sense.
work with you, I'm not working with you.
Let me simplify
because
this. So I know an MD who knows. So this is the rumor mill. Okay, I wish I had some music to introduce the rumor mill because I hate the rumor mill.
I have some Russian opera.
Yeah, Russian opera would be perfect for that. Thank you. Who told me that she knows a heart surgeon who told the nurses and the attending physicians, when my patient goes under for heart surgery, don't vaccinate them just because they're unconscious. Because there's a standing order that if you're unconscious and you're in a hospital, There's a standing order from the FDA to presume, if you don't know whether the person has their vaccine or not, to vaccinate. That would go to your microphone. There's the rumor mill.
Yeah, you can hear. Now I'm just being silly.
No, put it up there. It's good. I'm going to put a bit of that. Okay, and welcome to the rumor mill. Okay, so this is to not vaccinate them. Oh yeah, we got to turn it off. All right, so the reason why the heart surgeon didn't want the standing order to vaccinate to be enforced was because the patients had much worse health outcome after heart surgery if they were vaccinated before. Much worse.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, that falls on me. That makes me look like a bad surgeon. So within the healthcare industry, there are people that are saying, wait a minute, these vaccines are making health problematic, and it's making me look bad.
Well, and providers are more and more going to be financially penalized for producing poor outcomes.
Yeah.
So they're going, people who in the past have not had the motivation to maybe say, is what's going on? Is there something even going on outside of what I'm doing? Because truly, that's going to happen with delayed vaccine injuries.
Yeah.
Because a doctor's going to have a patient that might have been recently vaccinated or dealing with some new autoimmune thing or whatever, and you're going to run into issues like that.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. Well, Joshua, this was a lot of fun. I learned a few things. Thank you for nailing it with the empty head. Remember the duality. That was great. And for bringing your expertise and your experience. Keep an eye on this, guys, folks. Joshua Bennet. He's going to a mover and shaker in modern healthcare, starting with the people in nursing homes and moving on from there, I'm sure. It's an honor to have you on the team at IPAC, and I look forward to us doing our collaborations together. For those of you that wanted websites, go to ipa-knowledge.org. You can go to unbreakingscience.com, or you can just Google me, James Lyons-Weiler, see my blog articles at jameslyonsweiler.com. The best way that you can support this particular podcast, of course, is through Patreon. You find us at patreon.com/WWDNYK. Dr. James Lyons-Weiler signing off. Talk to you guys later.